Oh, he crashed and then he got a flat tire and then
Right,
That's what I've heard on Twitter.
right.
a 4-inch gas pipe is no joke.
Yeah.
No, it's not. You're right.
Amy, it says 2 minutes. We don't have 2 minutes. Okay. She's counting down where we're like, no, not yet, not yet. Hi, Karen.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I got questions for you, fellow adults. How do y'all tell like what is on your receipt? It's like 2-letter abbreviations. How do you know what you're getting charged for?
What kind of receipt do you have there?
Like for groceries. I'm trying to figure out what I got charged for groceries, and it's like GVDKCHC. What does that mean?
I'm really good at this. I'm really good at this.
Chicken.
Yeah, it's chicken.
Feel free to message it to me. I'll help you.
Sure. Thanks, Anne.
I mean, to the extent you want me to know what you bought at the store.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, can we like censor whatever you bought first? Because I don't know. And also let the games begin.
My favorite's finding the date on some of those things to be able to know when you can return it. You're looking all over the thing. You never know what it is.
For tax receipts?
No, just if you're going to return something and
Oh.
it says you have a 30-day window, and you're like, well, when did I buy? Where is the date on this? Oh, we're counting down. Sorry. Are we ready? Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April 14th, 2021 Chapel Hill Town Council work session. It is a work session this evening. We have 2 main items on the agenda. We have discussion of charting our future phase 2, which is the rewrite of our land use management ordinance, otherwise known as the LUMO. You will hear that several times tonight. We have an update on the town budget coming forward, and this is one of many places that we'll be discussing the budget. And then I want to remind council, we have a short closed session at the end of this meeting. So you have that. I do have a few announcements. I love these announcements. Here we go. Hang on. Today, I was very pleased to attend the groundbreaking. It was a COVID-safe groundbreaking for the new CASA project on Merritt Mill Road, which has now been named Perry Place after Velma Perry. So we're very excited. I got to be part of the selection committee for the names. I'm just thrilled to be able to name it after Velma Perry. So that was just wonderful. This is to remind you all, this is a project that straddles the line between Chapel Hill and Carborough. It'll be a total of 48 units for households. They're using that word, households of people in all kinds of different categories, from disability to needing extra help, rental, will take vouchers. And it's just a wonderful affordable housing project being done with tax credits and the support of the towns, the county, and several nonprofits. So we're very, very pleased about this. They're actually going to start construction this summer. And so we're very pleased to see this moving along and getting done. So that's very cool. I finished up this afternoon with being on the Innovation Carolina Showcase. This is an annual event to showcase many different entrepreneur innovative ideas and activities and talk about the future of partnerships and what we have been doing to partner with innovation in Chapel Hill. The chancellor is always good at reminding us that over $1.2 billion in annual research dollars are directed to UNC Chapel Hill as they lead the way on many different things. And then I attended a breakout session learning all about the testing of wastewater. And again, UNC is leading in the nation with being able to test wastewater for the virus, for the variants of the virus. They have been given money by the state legislature to come up with a better protocol and more accurate analysis. And they talked about the difficulty in each lab does analysis different. So they're setting a standard for analysis because they predict we'll have more viruses in the future. And when they can see if the variants hit or if there's vaccine breakthrough, they're able to react more quickly and know where it's coming from. So this was really cool. And I didn't get to stay because I go to another meeting, but it was just a really wonderful showcase. And they did record it in case you're interested in seeing it yourself. There were 6 different breakout rooms with different topics of all kinds of different ideas, but over 530 startup companies that have come out of Carolina are still in existence. So that's really cool. So we have our own entrepreneur on council who also had a birthday this week. So happy birthday to Ty Wynn, one of our local entrepreneurs who stayed in Chapel Hill. So we talked about it. So happy birthday to you. All right, next week we have, let's see, there's a public information session on short-term rental, the short-term rental ordinance that's being proposed. That meeting's on Monday, April 19th at 5:15. And I'm assuming it's virtual. Also on Monday evening, the Reimagining Community Safety Task Force will meet at 5:30. We have a council meeting on Wednesday, the 21st. I do want to share with those of you listening, we are in the process of rearranging some agenda items so that we have time to discuss them appropriately. And right now, the ARA project will not be on the 21st. We're looking to postpone it a little later. We'll get back to you with the exact details on all that as we're working a few other steps out as well. We will continue to meet virtually. And so we encourage attendance to our meetings. Please go to the town website to see when the different items and what meetings you'd like to attend. We welcome you. We're also looking for people to apply to our advisory boards. So a lot going on in the town this spring. Also want to we had a short update about the gas leak on Estes Road that's still being repaired. Luckily, no one was hurt, but it has caused some major traffic slowdowns. We encourage people to avoid the area until that's repaired if at all possible. So getting that out there. All right, this is a council work session, but if we get through our items before 9 p.m., we will have time for public comment. We don't always have time for public comment at work sessions, but we do love hearing from you. And so please email us, call us, and give your input any way you'd like to give it. At the end of the meeting, if you are willing, we will call for public comments and ask people to raise their hand if we have time to do that. So in keeping with our state laws on virtual meetings, I need to do a roll call, council. As I call your name, please tell us whether you're here. And then I forgot to ask if anyone else has things to share. We'll do that after the roll call. Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Parker.
Here.
Councilmember Anderson.
Here.
Mr. Boyncy.
Here.
Ms. Gu.
Here.
Mr. Wynn, y'all moved all around again. I should know you alphabetically anyway, but sorry. Ms. Ryan.
Here.
Ms. Stegman.
Here.
Mayor is also here. And at work sessions, we usually use first names, but called your roll that way. Did anyone else have announcements to share? I had one more. This is the last weekend of the joint stream cleanup with Carborough. We're doing a cleanup instead of doing our normal sweep event. We're doing cleanup and asking people to do cleanups and then tell us about it or post on the website. It's a great activity to do with your family, and we encourage folks to go out. My kids used to love that opportunity to get in the creek and splash around. The weather should be good. We would love your help in helping clean up our creeks and streams in our community. So this weekend will be the last week up for the roundup. So thank you for that. All right. We will move to our first item on the agenda, which is the LUMO rewrite process. We have Ms. Duffy Rogers with us.
Good evening. Let me share my screen. Are you seeing slides or the presenter view?
We're seeing presenter view.
Okay. And are you seeing the slides now?
Still the same thing.
Seeing the PowerPoint program. There you go.
A little better. Okay. We can still see your comments on the side though.
Now go up to display settings, Elisa. That's it. Yeah, that's where you are.
Perfect. There you go.
I apologize. You would think we've been doing this so long, this wouldn't happen, but you just sort of never know where it's all going to pop out. Good evening. I am Elisa Duffy Rogers, the LUMO project manager, and tonight we begin the long-awaited LUMO rewrite. Tonight, I'd like to start our conversation about what makes a good LUMO. I should acknowledge that Councilmember Parker posed this question to me, and I thought it was a really good way to start our journey together. We will begin this evening by reviewing some major zoning topics as well as the context for zoning that we operate in here in North Carolina. We will explore some possible answers to the question in order to figure out what makes a good LUMO. And then I will briefly cover the LUMO rewrite project plan and conclude with next steps. So the Land Use Management Ordinance, or LUMO, is a UDO, which means it's a Unified Development Ordinance. A UDO is a code that includes all or most of the codes that affect development. At the beginning of my career, town codes had separate code sections for subdivisions and signs and zoning, and it became necessary for stakeholders to know that all these different code sections actually regulated development. Now many communities have a unified development ordinance so that most regulations affecting development are located in one place. And it is my expectation that we will continue to use a UDO for our LUMO. North Carolina is a Dillon's rule state. So what does that actually mean for us? In a Dillon's rule state, municipalities may only exercise the powers explicitly granted to them by the state. Therefore, we have a narrow box for zoning and subdivision regulations that we can only regulate expressly what we are permitted to regulate by the state. For this reason, you may see zoning ordinances and codes from other states that regulate many more things than we're permitted to do. It also means that we have to use both the carrot and the stick to realize our values and our visions, meaning that under the Dillon's rule, we can dictate certain zoning standards, like where a building may be placed on a lot, because the state has said we can do that. To operationalize some of our values, like green buildings, we may need to provide a carrot. And of course, the trick is going to be finding the right carrot. Since zoning was authorized in 1926, different schemes have been developed and utilized. All of these zoning tools have pros and cons. And let's start our exploration of what makes a good LUMO with a review of these zoning tools. I would like to point out that none of these tools require a certain development process. Let me say that again. The use of any of these tools does not necessarily require any specific development review process. Process will be a separate conversation with its own set of variables and tactics. So there are 5 basic types of zoning tools. There's Euclidean, performance, transactional, form-based, and hybrid. And as I've said to you many, many times, zoning is a very crude tool. It is crude partially by its very nature of being very blunt. It's also crude because of Dillon's rule. Many architects will tell you that zoning really does create only vanilla places. And I really wouldn't disagree with that statement, but it is one of the only tools that we have to create place. Therefore, we must use extreme care in order to use this crude tool to our best advantage. So what is Euclidean zoning? Euclidean zoning is the oldest and most common form of zoning, and it really doesn't get its name from the Greek mathematician. Instead, Euclidean zoning comes from the Supreme Court case, Village of Euclid versus Ambler Realty. And in that case, the Supreme Court said in 1926 that local municipalities could use zoning, and it was a valid local government power. Under Euclidean zoning, land uses are separated in order to mitigate the negative impacts associated with certain uses. And this separation was certainly appropriate given the types of commercial and industrial uses that were prevalent early in the last century. The disadvantage of Euclidean zoning is that the separation of uses really does mean that you have to drive to meet your daily needs. And we really do miss out on all the benefits and advantages of mixed uses. Performance zoning is an approach to zoning that is based on quantifiable performance standards that regulate the intensity of land use in order to prevent adverse impacts on neighboring properties. Some communities choose this form of zoning because of its flexibility, and they dictate these performance standards in order to dictate what the use must act like, but not where it may go. Instead, they really start looking at things like what kind of noises are generated, traffic, and other external impacts. The flexibility does come with a price, meaning that deciding which factors to regulate, how to regulate them, and then enforcing them can be burdensome. We all know what form-based codes are. In their earliest, purest form, they didn't regulate use at all. Instead, they concentrated on controlling the building's form and how that form addressed the public realm and the street. Most form-based codes today control use to some extent. And please understand that while we have tied form-based codes to a certain development approval process here, it really doesn't have to be that way. Form-based codes usually produce a more predictable built form than Euclidean codes. And the key is determining upfront in the beginning what form you desire and creating standards that create that form. And really that is the toughest part. So going hybrid says it all. Hybrid codes apply different tools as required by the context. Virtually every code I've ever written has been hybrid. So as I said at the starting of this overview, we have to understand these tools and strategically and tactically use them to their full advantage in order to get our new UDO. Doing so will really help us create the town that we desire. One of the unique things about Chapel Hill is that even though the town is relatively small, we really do have many opportunities to recognize and create many, many different places based on our existing built form and our natural environment. So I would expect that we're going hybrid. So before I move on, I'd like to stop right here and see if you have any questions or comments about zoning types or Dillon's rule or zoning in general.
Sorry,
Sorry, I can't see everybody, so.
hey, it's Amy. The transactional zoning, did I miss that between performance and form-based?
So transactional zoning really is what we have today. Every time we look at a special use permit or a conditional zoning. And so essentially what it does is negotiate a tiny little zoning code that is parcel specific. And so that is the type of zoning that we use most often.
Thank you.
Alan, did you have your hand up?
I did, yeah, quick question. So I guess thinking about our LUMO, was the intent at its beginning to have a unified development ordinance where all the development regulations are consolidated, or was there a different intent?
So based on the research I did back in 2003, it really was an intent to have a UDO and to bring all of those chapters together into one place.
Got it. Thanks.
Michael, then Hong Bin.
Yeah, you don't need to answer this now, just something to sort of maybe put in the parking lot. But I think it would be really helpful at some point in the not too distant future if you could take us through, you gave an example for, in terms of what we can and can't do under Dillon's rule. You gave one example. I think it would be really helpful if at some future point we were really able to understand those things that we can truly regulate versus those things that we have to either incentivize or negotiate. Again, I don't expect that, that's not a question for tonight, but it's something I think we're going to need to understand.
No, very good point. I'll put it in the parking lot. Yes, sir.
Hong Bin.
Well, I'm asking pretty much the same question that Michael just mentioned. Well, my understanding is the State General Assembly give the authority to the local government with regard to regulating land use. I think it gives very broad policing power to the local government in regulating the land use, as long as that it is to protect the safety, health, and the welfare of the community. Is that correct? I just want to confirm. Well, Michael said that they put in the parking lot, but I think that should be a straightforward clarification, but whatever that your judgment is in that.
I mean, just a very quick answer is the Supreme Court said in 1926 that zoning was a valid local government power to protect public health, safety, and welfare. Keeping in mind that definition of what is public health, safety, and welfare is the crux of the matter. So we have certain things that we are definitely expressly allowed to do that the state has defined as protecting public health, safety, and welfare. And as we talked about in the context of 160D, we have some opportunities to go beyond that narrow box if we're talking about conditional zoning. But I think that Councilmember Parker is right, that this is a much larger conversation than we're thinking about having tonight. So I think that we'll have a facilitated conversation about what that means and then how it translates into both the types of zoning that we may decide to use and processes.
And then the state legislature can also do things like take things away when they feel that we are not fitting their definition of health, safety, and welfare. I just remind council, there's a bill filed to take away our tree ordinance. So fun times. Anyway, all right. Moving along.
All right, anything else? So what makes a good LUMO and what do we want from our new LUMO? I've asked these questions to both of my teams and really got remarkably similar answers. Of course, we discuss both overall aspirations and technical details. But by and large, we all really came to the conclusion that a new LUMO should really incorporate the project goals that were set out at the beginning of this project, that it should operationalize and implement our town's values, and it should contain regulations that create our desired physical vision. And that is obviously a really tall order for any code. But if we are intentional, I know we can do it. In other words, we are rewriting our LUMO to implement the town's values and its vision. Back in 2017, Council established the Charting Our Future project goals, and they were to have predictability, functionality, and intentionality. For predictability, we are looking to create predictable review processes. For functionality, it means we want a UDO that clearly communicates the rules and is well organized. For intentionality, we must have a UDO that effectively implements the community's vision and its values. The values in this equation really come from the guiding statements that are in the future land use map and council strategic goals. And believe it or not, we really can implement these values in the new UDO, but that implementation really will come across a spectrum of tolerance. And in some cases, as I said previously, we'll use the carrot, and in other cases, we'll use the stick. These are really going to be difficult conversations. We will have to consider trade-offs and understand that some of our values are more important in some locations than in others. For example, we may decide to incentivize flood controls in certain areas of town and green buildings in others. Or we may provide a menu of community benefits and incentivize the menu in a particular area. Unless you direct otherwise, the values to be implemented through the LUMO rewrite have already been established, and the conversations we will be having during the LUMO rewrite will be how we implement your values through the LUMO.
Karen, you had a question? You have a raised hand.
Oh, whoops. That's an accident. Sorry.
No problem. Finally, we turn to the traditional reasons that communities write and rewrite their zoning codes.
Sorry, Jess did have her hand up now. Okay, just making sure I'm catching them.
Karen raised her hand on my behalf, obviously. Thank you for that.
I'm here for you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for looking out. I had a question about your last slide, Elisa. So as we think about kind of that granular look that you're talking about, where in some places we might want to incentivize stormwater, other places we want to incentivize something else. Totally makes sense. How do we think about that balance overall and looking at metrics at the higher level to say, overall, we have incentivized certain things in certain places, and then at the higher level, we really are showing our values in that we have green infrastructure over here, we have affordable housing over here, and when we put it all together, it really is kind of a balanced town. I mean, how do we, instead of kind of doing a piecemeal thing where then at the end we might be really heavy on one value and miss out on some others?
Right. So I can't fully answer that question at this point in time, but I will say that I 100% agree with you, which is that we have to keep the big picture always in focus. And with code rewrites, it's really easy to get down to the details and lose the big picture. What I could easily see happening as we're looking at figuring these more physical things out and figuring out how to get our values through them is that we keep, a running tally of what we're doing. And we have values across one axis, and then how we're implementing it across another. So that's one way of doing it, may not be the best way. But I think it's incumbent upon all of us to continually remember what our values are and how we're doing it. And then we may at some point in time have to say, you know what, we're going to have to switch this around. So it's just something we're going to have to keep, be mindful of throughout the process.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. I would just say as a comment that I totally agree, and we have to find a way to kind of just make sure that we're meeting multiple goals, right? That we're not overburdened. Overburdened's not the right word, but we're over focused on one value versus the others, that we're always trying to keep kind of, and obviously there are places where we can hit multiple goals and that's great, but then there are going to be places where we overemphasize one. And so kind of trying to stay in balance, I think is a really good focus for us.
So finally, we turn to the traditional reasons that communities write and rewrite their codes. And that's really to create our physical vision for the future. Our vision will come from the future land use map and from the first phase in the rewrite process, where we do some specific physical planning in our focus areas. I would like to provide you with one concrete example of how a policy statement gets translated into zoning standards. Back in 1988, we adopted a master land use plan that detailed what Chapel Hill should look like from the right of way. This plan said that the view from the street should be trees. Today, the LUMO requires a tree buffer along all of our major roadways, and you can see that from this photo of NC 54. Our long-range plans provide a vision, and the zoning code can implement the pieces that we decide to translate into regulation. So now I've talked for way too long, and I would like to open the discussion to you, for you to tell me what will make a good LUMO. We need to have these discussions now, even before we employ a consultant, in order to make sure that the request for proposal is as clear as possible about our expectations for a new UDO. So what do you think? Do you agree that the LUMO should implement our physical vision for the town and operationalize the values and our strategic goals and guiding statements? Or do you see this differently? So I do have a few more slides, but I really think it would be helpful if I stop sharing my screen now and open it up for discussion, if that's okay.
Elisa, just a question. Do you want to talk about process issues next, right? Not now?
Yes, ma'am, if that's okay.
Okay, yep, that's fine.
If y'all can wait to be called on, it helps. Do anyone want to start off on this? Ms. Gu?
Well, at least writing, but I think
Hangbin,
most of the conversations.
we didn't hear your first part. You were frozen.
Okay. Well, I heard at least in one of the slides that you mentioned, our LUMO rewriting needs to be driven by our visions and the goals and the values. But I think that there are lots of conversations throughout both the entitlement process and the discussions about LUMO, about the current limits. Let's say the traffic, the transportation, or the current existing communities, or the RCD, the sensitive environmental area, or the areas that we would like to protect. Those things, or both the strengths of different communities, or the characters of different communities, or the strengths or restrictions or limitations of these things. I always think that it's very important when before we talk about our visions and the goals, we need to understand what are the current situation or the limits or the constraints that we are facing. I don't know if there's any way that we can provide that kind of information that will serving the purpose of drawing the boundaries or the frameworks if we can build some, if we can have some the corridor is related or development, because this area we can see the affordable housing, we can see a lot of apartments that existing in that corridor, a lot of people using public transit, like these things, that kind of information. I think if we can collect that kind of information, or what kind of our town's greenway plan is, these informations, I think if we can build our consensus on that, that would be very helpful for us to build upon those, build upon our understandings of these constraints or characters or limits that we are already that are already existing. I think that will be very helpful for us to think through what are the other more aspirational kind of plans that we would like to have. I think in the past presentations, we talk about build on what the existing current strengths is and add on the things that are currently missing. I think that probably is a framework to develop. I just want to, because in our past conversations, it's very easy for people to propose all different people have different ideas, or the communities have different plans when it comes to what the visions and the goals, but without delineating what are the constraints and the limits or these things, I think sometimes it's difficult to build the consensus. I'm hoping that these kind of groundwork can be provided first, then the conversation will be more productive and focused.
Okay. Others? Jess?
You said we're talking about just big picture, and then we'll talk about process later. Is that right?
Yes, no, that's okay.
Okay. I mean, so I guess that in terms of the big picture, I do think we have to, on the front end, think about what are the big picture things that we need to worry about. You know, where do we want more community space? How do we create those connections, or how do we meet our goals about connecting our greenways? I think something that we often, that's the hardest thing, is breaking down the silos around how do we work with our community partners in places where there's, you know, public land ownership, and how do we plan ahead for those things? I do think we need to think on the front end about how do we engage people on the in those conversations early on. So the schools, UNC, you know, all the big landowners. I think another thing that we've seen is that remote working is here to stay. I think, you know, my husband was just told they're still going to be remote working well into the next year, and then go to at least 30% or something. And that's at a pretty big company. So I think we just need to be thinking about what does that look like, and how do we make sure that we are responding to that reality in the shorter term, but also maybe in the longer term, and just tracking how that looks. And also looking at metrics, you know, what do we want to be measuring, and how do we tell, you know, what do we want people to be able to access within a certain distance of walk? And so kind of putting out those measurements. I think finally, something that's really important, and this is maybe scoping in a little too far, but just bear with me, that like, I think something that's really important is thinking about how we grow our town, and how we put people together in ways that feel really not corporate, that we're allowing people to build equity and wealth through ownership, that we are allowing people to we're not just allowing, but we're incentivizing people to create that gentle density, and that we're early on messaging why that's important and what the benefit of that is. That, you know, those are the ways that we're going to create affordability and integration and diversity, and also allow people to gain that equity, as opposed to it going to corporations and to multinational corporations who, like, these properties are just on a spreadsheet, that they're just an item that then they trade in 7 years or whatever. So how are we really figuring out ways that are strategic to empower community members and empower people who live here to gain wealth, and also to bring people into neighborhoods so that we're not so monolithic, or we're not so lacking diversity in places. So, and I think, you know, we've had these really tough conversations where neighborhoods are like panicking that we want to allow a little more density. So, and we just have it because we weren't there yet. You know, I think we didn't allow people to understand some of those benefits or what it could look like. So I'm hoping that we can also do really strong messaging around what the benefit is and how it can be a really good thing, and how we can keep it from being the thing people are scared of. And maybe that's overly optimistic, but I'm hoping for the future that is going to be how it goes. But yeah, I think really focusing on what does that gentle density look like, and not just relying on, you know, any sort of large structure or anything else to provide the benefits that we so desperately need in our community, that really aren't going to happen that way.
I agree, but the only thing I would say is to sort of recap what I started at the beginning of this conversation with, is that zoning is a crude tool. And so what it may take to get that gentle density may be outside the scope of this new UDO. It may be some things that we need to build in terms of tools and tactics with our housing and community partners. But I do honestly believe that the education campaign that we're going to have in this first phase of the project will help with some of those that messaging that you're talking about. But please keep in mind that we're dealing with a constraint that is zoning. And those barriers are going to have to be overcome outside of that box.
Well, but I still think then we have to like break down the silos, where we're not just saying like, now it's housing and community, like go do it, right? That we're working together and realizing, and I know you know this, I'm not, but like that we are working with housing and community to figure out how that can figure in and how those puzzle pieces fit together with zoning. But I also think really giving good examples of, I mean, again, like I grew up in a duplex and it felt like a single family home. So what does it look to help people understand what duplex, triplex, fourplex really looks like, and what that means for owners in terms of the benefits there, but also that it really is not as much of a character issue as people feel like it's going to be. And also, I guess I would add finally that the character certainly needs to be taken into account. And what do we want to, how do we want to look at that green, and how do we want to differentiate ourselves from other communities around us that are improving and growing quickly? And so what is our competitive advantage? It has to be more than good schools, or that we are close to UNC, right? Because that's not going to be as much of a selling point anymore.
I'm going to interject here and ask a question. Elisa, where does the different plans that we have created fold into this? We have the mobility plan, we have the affordable housing plan, we have our climate action plan, we have an economic development plan, we have a Parks and Rec master plan. How does that come in front of this when someone's considering something, that we have these plans that are integrated into part of they're integrated into the LUMO? Do they stand alone? Do they come before, or are they referenced? How does that fit with this network?
So it's sort of a three-part answer. If you are looking at conditional zoning applications, anything that has been adopted as a part of our comprehensive plan, i.e. Chapel Hill 2020, which would be something like the mobility plan and something like the flume, we can implement the values and policies in those documents through conditional zoning. So it's very important that if we have something that has not been adopted through the legislative process that is necessary to amend the comp plan, and we want it to be considered when we're looking at conditional zoning applications, that we do that. So that's sort of one thing. Part of this first phase will be what we call the diagnostic phase. And the consultants will be charged with looking at all of those plans and understanding what we need from those plans that's important to us and figuring out how to implement them through the LUMO. We can do that through a very many different ways. We can do it through defining very carefully what our purpose statements are for individual districts. We can do it by setting certain standards. We can do it by incentivizing. But it's very important that whomever we hire understands how important those individual pieces are to us, and that our expectation is that they're going to be implemented in some way through the LUMO. So that is going to be paramount. Like, one of the questions we will ask the consultant is, do you understand how important it is to us that the values expressed in those plans come through in our LUMO?
Okay, thank you. I had Amy, then Karen, then Michael, then Alan.
Okay, thank you, Elisa. So first of all, I would like to continue on with some of what Jess was talking about, the gentle density discussion. I know there are places that our ordinance actually militate against certain things. Like I believe there's zoning districts where you have to have a double-sized lot to put an ADU on it. So there are things certainly that we can do that will make it easier, will make it possible for people to do things. And I think it's, in terms of equity, I think it's a really important discussion for this community to have. And I think it's going to be a very difficult discussion at times. So just thinking about how right now the LUMO rewrite, a lot of the community conversations and work is structured around the future focus areas. And I wonder if maybe, in addition to the 5 or 6 future focus areas, there's also a focus area on residential, where we start to have some of these conversations as well. So just think about that. But I think that that's a really important conversation that this town needs to have. So I think to answer your big question, to answer the question you want answered, I think that the values you have picked are good ones. I'm sure that as it proceeds, other things will happen or things will get nuanced, but I think you're on the right track there. The devil's in the details, of course, and as you say, we're going to have to make trade-offs, and anything that the staff can provide help on, helping people see what the trade-offs are. I think that some of that gets back to what Hung Bin was talking about with data and understanding where we are and what things are important where and what our constraints are where. But however you can help us really understand what things are very important in certain places and maybe medium important or less important, and or what things we'll be giving up if we make certain choices is going to be difficult, but I think very, very important. And I think Jess also talked about siloing. I know I have been involved in other planning processes in town that very much, I think 2 different ones that very much siloed the future focus areas. And it was difficult because we were in a lot of ways just being told, look at this place and say what you want here, and look at this place, but don't think about how they all come together in a whole. And I think that gets to the idea of balance across the town that we need to have. So, if we think we will grow and need X number of new apartments, and we put X number of new apartments in all the future focus areas, then we've seriously missed the mark or incented them or zoned that way. So I think we need to be able to shift scales up and down and to look at those different things as we go through the process. But yeah, and I think the only other thing in the values, one of the things I really liked when you would talk about the flume was preserving what we value and what we like and improving where we need to. And I don't remember, your wording was better than that, but I think that was a really nice way to frame it. That this is a recognition that there are things that are great here and that we want to keep. And then there's places where we can do better. And so. But thank you and good luck. This is going to be, it's going to be a fun ride.
Karen, Michael, Alan, then Ty.
I have a question first, actually. Are we redoing the entire LUMO or just the focus areas, or are we just trying to fix things?
Well, before I even came, the intention was to burn it down and start over. So I think we will be thinking about a physical vision in terms of doing some specific planning within those focus areas. But I think Councilmember Ryan is 100% correct in that we can't allow them to become isolated pockets. We have to understand how they fit within the fabric of the town. And if we don't do that, then we've missed the mark. But while the flume was very much focused on those focus areas, at your direction, we did add the guiding statements, which did open up many, many different avenues, such as the general density that we've been talking about, that is decidedly outside of those focus areas. And so we will be talking, unless y'all direct otherwise, about that gentle density and what that means in terms of the zoning districts that we have, in terms of the standards that we have, in terms of the types of units that we have. But I don't anticipate, to be really frank with you, because we don't have the budget to do the same level of physical planning and visioning that I think we will do for the focus areas. But if you had an opportunity to look at the very broad overview of the plan, we are asking the consultants to do what I've just called a missing middle scan that looks at what our existing housing stock is, looks at our existing lots, looks at all of these things to start figuring out how we can get that general density or that missing middle in our town, given our existing physical constraints. So that what's in this plan, and our next time we talk, we'll take a really deep dive into what all of these things mean, is really to look at, as Councilmember Green put it, lots of our constraints, and to figure out what we need to think about in terms of these things, whether it's a physical impact analysis or whether it is the missing middle scan. So, but the short answer, which I never give, is we're starting over.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. I think you asked us what we want to see. Was that your question? Or what a good process would look like, or something like that? What am I answering?
The question was, do you all agree that we're going down this road together to not just build our physical vision, which truthfully we can do fairly easily, right? It's numbers, it's standards. But are we walking this road to really use our long-range planning documents and our values and figure it out in the LUMO how we can get them? Because if you don't agree with that approach, I need to know it now, before we put the RFP out. That was the whole intent for this conversation. Plus, to start to give you some basic vocabulary about the things we're talking about.
Okay, that helps. Yeah, and hopefully we won't tell you one thing and then change our mind a year from now, but we could, that happens. For me, yeah, I think, I think in order to do what we have said we want to do in terms of our, all the strategies and goals we have already put in place, from climate action through to, connectivity and greenways and all the other things. I think that we do have to be, we have to look broader. I don't think we can accomplish those, and understanding with the caveat you've already given that we can only do so much with this tool, but in terms of connectivity and equity and climate, all of those things, I think we can't just look at those specific focus areas. I think we do have to look across the town to see how they all fit together. And I would like to see a really future focused process where we're really talking about that future vision, and that we all sort of, not that we're all lockstep, but I think we all share there's a lot of commonality in the vision we have around some of the things I just mentioned. So keeping that that is what this is about. And to really looking to that future vision that we all say, if only there was enough transit, I don't have to get in my car. We're just not quite there yet, or that bike lane doesn't connect enough to get me where I want to go. And, so that kind of thing. And I think we also need to learn from, again, recognizing we are limited at this state within North Carolina about what powers we have, but there are a lot of trends that are happening nationally, not just here. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that, whether it's housing shortages or sort of the sort of corporate approach to development, or all sorts of trends that we can both be aware that it's not just Chapel Hill, and so understanding it in sort of a broader framework than, Chapel Hill's not doing this or should have done that. The loss of retail, all of those things, and then also learning from some of the innovative approaches that other communities are doing, using zoning tools to try and address some of those issues. So I think we need to learn from what's happening nationally, and then of course apply it in the ways that we can here. And then also just, I think, I talked about future focus, but also I think it's so important that it's informed by history. I think we're all aware at this point of the history of zoning and redlining and the impact that history still has on housing affordability and who has wealth and who doesn't, earned wealth from real estate and all of the benefits that come along with that. So I think we need to really be mindful of the history of zoning and work actively to correct and counteract some of those historic inequities that still exist within our codes, like everyone else's, really. And then I also think, and I may be getting ahead of us a little bit, but I just won't comment, I promise, next time. But in terms of how we communicate about this, I think there's probably like 3 members of the public on this meeting right now, which I don't blame them at all. I would not come to a council meeting on the LUMO rewrite, and yet it has really big impact, right? In a lot of ways on the community. So I think we have to think about how some ways that we can get input that's not, hey, public, come talk about zoning, but talk about, we need to frame it around the impacts of the decisions we're making on the future of the town, and sort of kind of name those a bit more clearly so that, people understand, because it's obviously really fascinating, but to some few in the world, but for the rest of us, them, of course, fascinating me, there is a lot at stake in some ways. So I think we need to really figure out how to have a community conversation in a different way. That's all I will say. Thank you.
Michael, then Alan, then Ty.
Yeah, I second a lot of what Amy said. I think, this has to be looking at the town entire. We may not change everything, but I think everything at least needs to be looked at. I don't want to just say, as we did with the flume, that, we're not looking at 80% of it and we're just focusing on 20%. I think that, does all of us a disservice. In the end, I'm not suggesting that everything be changed, but I am suggesting that, the LUMO rewrite covers the entire town and we don't just sort of cut and paste a lot of existing areas, number one. Number two, I think that, I absolutely agree with your notion, Elisa, of embodying the town's values. It has to be that. But I think the trick there is going to be getting beyond the high level words and operationalizing what those values mean to people. It's at a very high level, we have a very high level of consensus, but that may or may not hold as we get into, sort of peel back the first couple of layers. The other thing that I don't know how this would work, because the project is the LUMO rewrite, but what you've said is that zoning is a very blunt instrument and that that you need to use other things to achieve certain other goals. So number one, I'd like to understand, just as I talked about earlier, what can we do and what can't we do, given that we're a Dillon's rule state? What can zoning do for us and what can't zoning do for us? And then make sure that we're integrating, as we rewrite the LUMO, whatever other tools that we need in order to ultimately get to where we want to be, right? So we know that we have certain values, and whether it's having to do with racial equity or affordability or connection, connectivity. Where zoning doesn't get us there, I think it's really important for us to figure out, and as much as possible in synchrony with the LUMO rewrite, develop those, deal with those other tools that will get us closer to what we want, if zoning is as blunt an instrument as you said it is.
I think it's we're hanging. Colleen used this phrase. She says the LUMO rewrite has been billed as the silver bullet, and it's going to cure all of our ills. And part of what I wanted to accomplish tonight was an understanding that it can't do all of that, but I do have built into phase 3 some of those other things that you're talking about. Whether it is overcoming, because ADUs, for example, we can incentivize all day, or we can allow all day long in the code, but they're very expensive to build. So
and many neighborhoods don't allow them because of HOA covenants. So, I mean, that's another thing, is understanding the limitations that what zoning will get us given HOA covenants and other kinds of things like that.
There are barriers out there that are outside of zoning that we may or may not be able to overcome. And so what I want to have happen in phase 3 is to look at all of those things, whether it's the gentle density or whether we need to think about economic incentives through our economic development programs to get us to certain places, what it's going to take to actually get to our vision, even if it's outside of zoning. So that's what I think has to be a part of the project as well, in order for us to really get where we want to go and to spend our money wisely on this project.
Thank you.
Alan, then Ty.
Yeah, so there was an interview recently done on, I think it was the WUNC Politics podcast with Professor Rick Su of the UNC School of Law, where he raised a point that Karen alluded to earlier. As a Southern town, we've come out of an era in which de jure segregation or legalized segregation was the standard. And that meant that municipal codes across the state and across the South, really across the country, were at one point in time drawn up to explicitly limit access and to exclude people. And while we've had national and state legislation in the decades since, such as the Fair Housing Act, which have helped to expand access, although with limiting results, I think we can all agree that residential segregation, the concentration of economic development and activity still persists, even in a town like ours. So, as part of our visioning, I'd like to see us really intentionally and critically examine the way that we've done things in terms of development regulations, to challenge them and to see how we might change them to promote more of the inclusivity that we all value as a town. So I just want to hit on that particular point, because if we don't do that kind of intentional work now, then when? Thanks.
Hi.
I couldn't have said it better than Councilmember Buensi. Second, everything he just said. And then going back to something that Jess said, I think, and also Karen, about being future focused. And, as we're coming out of this pandemic and the way that people live, work, and play is, drastically changing. How are we as a town, really looking at how we as a town can capture, and I don't even know the word I'm looking for here, but adapt to that future model, because I think the current ways that towns have been planned and such, in addition to kind of the racist background of zoning, but the model of kind of live, work, play that we're used to seeing currently, I think is going to drastically change in the coming decades. And so making sure that we are planning for that. And then also, and this isn't really a town issue, it's more of a county issue, but the broadband access, I don't know how we include that in this, but planning for that and around that, I think that's a huge equity issue in our community. And then also want to touch on the communication strategy. I think a lot of folks, even after we passed the flume, whenever I would mention, if I mentioned it in passing conversation, whenever that topic would come up, people, what is the flume? What is this? And it is a very, very impactful undertaking that we're going on that really is going to impact future generations of this community. So finding ways where we can make that, whether it's like turning it into more digestible little chunks, maybe Elisa, you can make some TikToks or something, just some ideas out there, but something that is easily digestible and understandable to kind of the common person, because I still don't understand a lot of this, and I'm reading hundreds and hundreds of pages of packet material on it. So anything in that realm that we can kind of share, and us as council members can also share broadly, would be very, very helpful.
Okay. We are very chatty tonight. We have some other agenda items to get through, but I think, Elisa, you were hearing from council that they do want the values piece. They don't want just the form and design piece. They want the values incorporated into this. I heard a little more about incorporating our other approved plans from some other council folks as well. Can you tell us what other, you have a few more slides to show us, but can you tell us what else you need decision-wise from us tonight?
No, ma'am. I mean, y'all covered that very well, I think. And so I think we're all in alignment about really bringing this LUMO to life with our values as well as our fiscal vision.
Can you remind us about a timeline that you're looking at so that we're staying focused on where we need to be when? Just
So,
a rough guess timeline.
Our tentative timeline is that we will be in this planning phase through the end of July. And during that part of that, we will be, as I said, issuing the RFQ or the RFP that we will be looking at during that diagnostic and visioning through August of this year and through April of next year. And then we will hopefully have everything adopted. This obviously is a very aggressive schedule by December of 2023.
Wow. Okay. All right.
So I will, I realize we do have another item, so I'll share my screen very quickly and then hopefully. And are you seeing the
Yes.
process? Wonderful. For a brief overview of the LUMO rewrite process, we are currently in the project planning phase. That will include the issuance of the RFQ as well as an educational campaign to educate community members. As an aside, we are actually talking to some UNC professors about doing some cool presentations that take everything and put it into bite-sized chunks. We're looking at doing things like using City Skylines, which is a game simulation program. So trying to find some innovative ways to make zoning at least slightly understandable. Phase one will include an analysis of LUMO's deficiencies and an examination of our existing long-range planning documents and your strategic goals. And understanding how to align those with LUMO regulations. And then hopefully we will undertake our physical visioning at this point as well. Phase two will include your review and endorsement of phase one. Phase three will be that technical code writing phase, as well as looking at zoning incentives to facilitate the creation of community benefits. And then phase four is adoption. So our next steps, we will continue our conversation hopefully in May, and the big topic of conversation, in addition to a deeper dive into the project plan, we'll be discussing what you think works and doesn't work with the LUMO. And then, as I said, hopefully we'll have the RFQ issued by the end of May. So, any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, the staff is well, our planning staff in particular is well aware of what works and doesn't work as far as technically in the LUMO and all the vagueness. Are they going to be helping us understand what we need their input? And so how do we get that and to hear their input before we're making these big decisions, because we are not planners and we're not doing this on a daily basis. We can set the value system and the policies, but about the technical pieces? Where does the staff help us understand?
So I have two teams that I staff, one of which does have planners and stormwater people and all of that on it. In terms of our next conversation, I'm looking for very big picture things. I'm not looking for minute details.
Okay.
Our assumption was, and if I'm wrong in this, you can tell me, that you that work with the code almost on a weekly basis probably have things that you really like and things that you really don't like at a big picture level. And that's what I want to hear. And then it will be looking at that to figure out if there's any commonality or any grounds where we need to think strategically and tactically about how we write the RFP. That's really the goal of these conversations, is for me to understand exactly what's in your mind so that I can craft this document in a way that is the most meaningful to someone who might be proposing. In terms of longer terms, we will have the staff involved in, I already have a list of them that I've been compiling for the last 3 years, and everything they've told me is awful. And then in my 160D work recently, I have added to that list many more things that are awful. But yes, we will have them involved in the conversations, both at a very high level and at a very technical level as we're moving forward.
Thank you. Any final comments before we get to our next item? This is going to come back to you in May for a deeper dive. Ben?
Yeah, I have just a clarification question. So how, Lisa, how do you want us to provide input? You said that you want us to share with you what we particularly like or dislike. Do we email you, or is there other opportunities to have a conversation like this? Or what is the way for us provide both individual input and as a group as a whole?
You're more than welcome to email me anything. I'm hoping to be back in front of you in May for that really deep dive into the process, and then just to ask that opening question. What do you like and what you don't like? So if you want to email me anything ahead of that conversation, I'd be happy to read it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I hope you got what you needed from us. It was an interesting discussion, so thank you much. And it is hard to comprehend. It's a huge topic, visioning process, and it is hard. So whatever help we can get in helping get the information out to the general public in bite-sized pieces, like you said, and understanding that we do need their input and that we do need them engaged, and not to make it so overwhelming to explain to folks, would be very helpful. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our second item on the agenda is continuing our budget discussions, and I know we have the Orange County tax assessor here with us this evening as well to ask questions. But Mr. Jones, are you starting us off tonight?
Actually, I'm gonna start us off, if that's okay.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for having us here today. We have two presentations this evening. The first one, we have our Orange County tax assessor and our deputy tax assessor here to present some information on the reval, and then Maurice and myself, we will come and present some additional information specific to the town's budgets. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Nancy Freeman, our tax administrator, and Chad Phillips, our deputy tax assessor, who are going to be presenting this evening on the town's reval. Welcome, Nancy.
How are you doing? I wasn't sure that Chad was going to make it. He's a little under the weather, had his second COVID shot, and so if he goes away, just know it's because he's not doing well. So what I've got here is a presentation for you guys, a PowerPoint presentation that I need to share, and let me see if I can do this, and we will get started on it. Okay, so now I'm hoping that you're seeing the screen that says 2021 revaluation results.
We are. Yes.
Chapel Hill Town Council. Great. Yep. Okay, so I did the right thing. Okay. So as Amy said, I'm Nancy Freeman, the tax administrator for Orange County, and this is to provide an overview for you of the 2021 revaluation. North Carolina counties must conduct a revaluation at least once every 8 years. Orange County has traditionally followed a 4-year schedule for revaluations. Orange County's last revaluation took place effective January 1 of 2017. The effective appraisal date of our current revaluation is January 1 of 2021. What is a revaluation? It is a process of updating the real property tax assessments to market value and present use value as of a single appraisal date, which in this case is January the 1st of 2021. The primary goal of the revaluation is to equalize the tax base. It is needed to realign the values of real property throughout the county and to maintain equitable and uniform property values among property owners. Market values are shaped by property sales. Our office has a responsibility to look at the sales, interpret the market data, and estimate market values for all properties by way of a mass appraisal method. Hang on a second. I'm speaking, just leave it. I'm sorry, I had a little interruption here. What is market value? North Carolina General Statute 103-283 defines market value as the price estimated in terms of money at which the property would change hands between a willing and financially able buyer and a willing seller, neither being under any compulsion to buy or sell, and both having reasonable knowledge of all the uses to which the property is adapted and for which it is capable of being used. We review all sales in the county to determine if they are qualified sales. We use qualified sales to shape the values for the property sales in the county. A qualified sale is also known as an arm's length transaction. And in real estate, an arm's length transaction is when the buyer and the seller each act in their own self-interest to try to get the best deal they can. A seller is trying to make the largest profit. The buyer is trying to get the best deal, spend the least money. What is not a qualified sale? A foreclosure sale would be an example of not a qualified sale. A sale where there is a relationship between a business affiliation, where there is a relationship or business affiliation between the seller and the buyer would not be considered a qualified sale. If I sell my house to my daughter, that would not be a qualified sale. What is included in a revaluation? All residential and commercial land and permanent structures in Orange County are included in the revaluation. Personal property such as motor vehicles, boats, planes, public utility property, business personal property are not included in the revaluation as they are valued each year. They're reappraised annually. As part of our revaluation, we do community outreach. We have a plan to inform property owners of the process of the revaluation, from the request for input from property owners long before the values are finalized to assisting property owners with the appeal process. 2 websites were launched in July of 2019. One of those is the Property Records Card Search. The site provides current information that is on record for each property. It is an interactive web page that allows the user to review property data and report to us by email any issues that they see with the property. If you review the property, you see that we've listed you with 2 baths, you actually have 3, you can send an email to let us know of that. If you see that it shows you have 5 bedrooms and you actually have 2, you can send an email and let us know that as well. If you see that the square footage is wrong, you can also send that information to us. With the information that is sent to us, then we would provide that information to an appraiser, and then they would contact the taxpayer to make a site visit if needed, or check the record as necessary to make any corrections to our record. And that information is important. The more specific data we have about an individual property, the better, because what we do is a mass appraisal. We don't necessarily look at every house that's in Orange County. So the individual nuances between the houses comes from the information that a taxpayer may provide to us. So the give and take between the taxpayer and our office, or the homeowner and our office, is very important so that we have a good, accurate account of the property and can value it properly. The second website that we launched in July of 2019 is a public compa website, and that site allows the user to review sales information on similar properties to their own. The tax office mailed data validation forms in February of 2020 Basically, that form showed characteristics for the properties, and the property owner was invited to make any corrections needed and send that back in if the information was not correct. And that helped us update records and make sure that we have good current information. We received over 4,300 responses to update the data from that mailing. We also provided a revaluation information insert in our 2020 tax bill in July of 2020. We added a revaluation video in July of 2020 to our website. Basically, it explains similar to what I'm telling you, that the basics of a revaluation. We provided a presentation in October of 2020 at the Schedule of Values public hearing at the Board of Commissioners meeting. In December of 2020, we provided another revaluation insert with our 2021 listing form. And in this, as a matter of fact, just a few weeks ago, there was a highlight for the revaluation in the News of Orange that to let folks know that the notices had been sent out, and how they could reach us if they had not received their notice. We provide periodic public announcements for the county on the county's main webpage. We've highlighted the revaluation in local newspaper advertisements, and we've used social media to bring the revaluation process to the attention of the public. And again, this is an important part of the revaluation, because the more input we have from property owners, the more accurately we are able to value the properties. We use the help of commercial appraisal companies to help us value our commercial properties. A local commercial real estate appraisal firm provided market research and sales. A second commercial appraisal firm interpreted the data, the market research, and provided recommended values for all commercial properties, and taking into account any effects of the pandemic. And our senior appraisal staff reviewed the recommended values prior to entering the values into our computer system. The end result was, the estimated breakdown between residential and commercial is 77% residential and 23% commercial, as far as the values, our final values. Residential properties, we have a strong seller's market for the residential properties. The demand for residential properties has been driven by federal government's continued actions to keep interest rates low, pandemic-related circumstances of stay-at-home orders, increased demand and decreased inventory due to cessation of construction early in the pandemic. It's taken a while for builders to get caught up. So therefore, houses are in high demand and are selling at a premium. We conducted a survey with other counties that are conducting a 2021 revaluation to see what their average countywide growth was. And we had 15 counties who responded. The range was from 8% to 36%, and the average countywide growth was 17.88%, with a median of 16%. How did Orange County compare? Our percentage of growth from 2020 to 2021 for the reval is 12.6%, which is a little lower than the average for all the counties reporting, the ones that actually responded to the survey. Within the county, Mebane actually realized the largest percentage of growth at 44.2%. These figures include estimated values for real property. They include individual personal property, business personal property, public utility values, and the values for registered motor vehicles. So this is a fully encompassed tax base. For Orange County, the 2021 countywide tax base, let's see if I can say that number, 21,739,530,791. And as I said before, the overall percentage of growth from 2020 to 2021 is 12.6%. If we compare that value to the tax base for 2017, the percentage of growth is 20.1%. Residential represents approximately 77% of the, 77% of the 2021 tax base, and commercial 23%. The overall growth approximately for residential is 36%. The overall growth for commercial is approximately 11%. If we look at Chapel Hill, the tax base for Chapel Hill for 2021 is $8,874,302,213. The overall percentage of growth from 2020 to 2021 is 13%. And if you compare it to 2017 for the revaluation, then it's 18.3%. And in the 2021 tax base, residential represents approximately 67% of the tax base and commercial 33%. In comparison, in 2017, residential represented 72% of the tax base and commercial represented 28%. The overall growth in value, the information that I'm providing, includes new construction and also includes increase in values due to the revaluation. We don't really have a way to break those out, and I wish that we did have that, but it's just not something that we can do to show you the differences there. What I can show you is that for the 2021 revaluation, residential growth is approximately 9%, commercial growth is approximately 36%, as compared to 2017, where the residential growth was approximately 2% and commercial was approximately 41%. And looking at the years since then, the average annual growth in the non-reval years since 2017 is 1.57%. The growth from 19 to 20 was 2.12%. So that would give you some ideas and a way to kind of look at what the growth might be without looking at the revaluation. Value change for Chapel Hill properties depends widely on the property type and location. This table shows the number of properties that increase, decrease, and stay the same. As you see, the vast majority of the properties increased in value for this revaluation. And just so you'll understand what this means, that there's new and old parcels there, which make up a very, very small percentage of the change. But that would be where an old parcel might be split into two new parcels. So the old parcel is no longer valued for 2021, the new parcels are. And in the same respect, there may be two parcels that are combined into one to make one single new parcel. So that's where those numbers are coming from. This map shows a spatial analysis of the property value in Chapel Hill due to the 2021 revaluation. And as you can see, the increase is evenly distributed across the entire town. So you don't see that it's occurring just in one single area. The red shows the decrease, gray shows equal valuation, and the black shows the increase. The average value of a home based on jurisdiction, as you can see, Chapel Hill's value is relatively higher than the rest of the county. The average value for a home is $483,643. These values include building and land and other features such as garages or sheds. Townhomes and condominiums are excluded from these averages. The industry standards that we use in order to measure the accuracy of the values that we are using are called sales ratios. We measure mass appraisal effectiveness by calculating the median sales ratio, and a sales ratio of less than 1 indicates that the tax assessment is lower than the property's recent sales price, and vice versa. The data spread above and below the median is indicated by the coefficients of dispersion, or COD, and post-revaluation, the goal is to have it at less than 15. The sales ratios for the county and for Chapel Hill, and as you can see for the other municipalities, are within the industry standards for our revaluation for the 2021 revaluation. Sales ratios are verified by category of property. The ratios indicate tax assessments represents about 100% of current market sales. The coefficient of dispersion indicated the data spread, and the goal is 15 or less. Overall, the countywide sales ratio is 1. The coefficient of dispersion is 7.7. And all these are countywide figures. I don't have these for just Chapel Hill. The improved residential sales ratio is 1 with a coefficient of dispersion of 7. Improved commercial sales ratio is 1 with a coefficient of dispersion of 14.8. There's a wider spread there. And vacant land countywide is a sales ratio of 1 with a coefficient of dispersion of 15.2. Our remaining schedule, which part of this is a little old now, but the new values were available on our website on March 22nd. We mailed the vast majority of the revaluation notices on March 24th. There was a small additional mailing of about 300 commercial property notices on March 31st. Informal appeals began as soon as the notices were received. The deadline for informal appeals is April 30th. Formal appeals period begins on Monday, May 3rd, when the Board of Equalization and Review convenes, and the formal appeal period ends on June 30th, when the board adjourns. Revaluation notices were mailed on the 24th. They should be received at this point. If anyone has not received a revaluation notice for their real property that they own, the simplest thing to do, if they're able, is to send us an email to reval@orangecounty.nc.gov, and we will be able to email a duplicate notice. We can also put one in the mail. I know that there have been issues with the mail in the last few months, so we are looking at ways to circumvent that if people are not receiving their mail, and use the email instead. Let's see. Okay, I think I've hit all those. The revaluation notice mailing, the notice included information on the webpage to appeal online. If someone is not convinced that their value is correct, they can go to our online site and appeal strictly online. They don't have to send paperwork in. There's information on the web pages that they can use to review the data and find comparable sales. As I mentioned before, the property record card search and the public comper. There's an informal appeal form that is included with the notice as a courtesy for property owners who do wish to appeal. And there is instructions, a very detailed instructions page to help people know how to fill out the appeal form if they would like to appeal their value. It's important to point out that the property owner may appeal their value in any year, not just in a revalue year, but they can appeal their value in any year. The first stage of the appeals process is the informal appeal. Basically, that is an in-house review with a staff appraiser. And if someone they do an informal appeal and they are not satisfied with the results of that, they do have the option to appeal formally to the Board of Equalization and Review. If someone does not appeal informally, they still have the right to appeal to the Board of Equalization and Review. And if they are not satisfied with the results from the Board of Equalization and Review, they are able to appeal to the North Carolina Property Tax Commission. And if that is not a satisfactory result, there is also the appeals courts that they would be able to go to as the final stage of appeal. The potential impact of appeals. Currently, we have received approximately 475 informal appeals and have reviewed about 73% of these. We are expecting more appeals than the 2017 revaluation, possibly as many as 4,000 informal appeals and up to 1,000 formal, I put in formal both places there, I'm sorry, and 1,000 formal appeals, with possibly 200 appealing to the North Carolina Property Tax Commission. The reduction in value due to appeals is accounted for in the estimated tax base, and the estimation is based on historical percentages of reduction from prior revaluation years. And here we have the websites for the Real Property Search webpage and for the Public Compa webpage, and also the website for the online appeals tool. And contact information, 245-2100 option 2, and readout at orangecounty.nc.gov. We also have a live chat on our website, on our webpage, that we can be contacted that way. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. You can bring us back to full screen.
Here we go.
All right. I know council members have some questions and some comments. Alan, you had your hand up, then Ty.
Yep, thank you for the presentation. I did have a few questions. So my first one is, there's a question that was asked ahead of this meeting about university properties and whether they're counted in terms of tax evaluations. And I remember the answer to that question said that no, traditionally, because university properties are exempt, but that there's been a project underway to actually determine those revals for or the valuations for those exempt properties, and I assume that maybe there are some other exempt properties in there as well. So I guess I'm just
correct.
How close that project is to being finished.
I think that we still have about 20 or 30 university buildings that need to be valued. And I believe, Chad may want to correct me here, but I believe that that is the last of what we have to put values on as far as exempt properties are concerned. Other things that have been valued, exempt properties that have been valued, would be schools like our high schools and elementary schools and that type of thing. So we are close to finishing that project. We just need to key in about 30 more of the university buildings. And we actually have that information, but that was put on hold so that we could finish our evaluation before we completed that project.
Got it. So are you looking at a few more months, a couple more months to
and Chad may, again, he may want to correct me here, but I think that it would take a little while to get that done, because we do have our appraisers focused on doing the appeals at this time and being able to respond to taxpayers' questions and their concerns about their property. So that's kind of the forefront right now. And we do expect that would take us, several months to get through that process once we do the informal and then the formal appeals, which would last until June 30th. So it would probably be a few months down the road.
Got it. Thank you. And then
you're welcome.
Let's see. So I had a couple of questions with respect to the review process for the Board of Equalization and Review. On appeal, for the informal review and for stage 2, the hearing before the board, what types of evidence can staff consider and can the board itself consider?
We urge and urge taxpayers to provide any appraisals that they have on the property. They can set up a time for an appraiser to come out for a site visit if there's issues with square footage, so that the house can be remeasured. Anything that the taxpayer has or the appellant has, can be presented at the hearing with the Board of Equalization Review. And we do encourage taxpayers to attend it. Now we are doing those virtually. So there is a good response to that folks are doing the virtual appeals. But we do encourage them to provide any information that they can, any sales information, any appraisal information, and site plans, if you know, we've got listed that they have a full basement, a full finished basement, and their basement is not finished, again, that's something where an appraiser can come out and verify that information.
Okay. And then my last, go ahead.
The Comper website is really good for this too, because you can go in there and you say, here's my property, and the website will actually provide you with 3 or 4 comparable properties that are current qualified sales. So they can present that to the board and say, you know, here's 3 properties that are like mine and what they sold for. So kind of using that just like an appraisal, just without having to actually buy an appraisal.
Got it. Thank you. And then my last question is, are there any situations or circumstances under which the county itself initiates a review of its own evaluation after its reval has been conducted and made public?
For instance, the situation that we have now where we've received an email from Mr. Vaughn, gosh, I don't have it in front of me for his first name, but he is concerned about a specific neighborhood and has asked us to review that. And you know, we do, until the informal appeals period is complete, until the Board of Equalization and Review convenes, we do have the option to review those properties and make any changes if we see that the values that we have are not correct or that need to be adjusted. We can do that. So you know, that would be something that we are doing now for that specific area. You know, is looking at the sales and looking at the information that's been provided to us to make sure that we do have those values accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Hi.
Thank you. So I also had a question about the north side and the letter that Mr. Vaughn sent y'all. So just to clarify on your previous answer, so you are that the tax appraiser office, I guess, is going back and redoing or looking at those properties with the information that was sent to you all.
Yes, and actually I have reached out to him and asked him if he would give me some more specific information about the properties. I know he mentions there were 2 or 3 specific instances where he said that the actual owner was going to be in hardship, you know, with the changes in the value. So I've asked him if he could give us more specific information so we can make sure that we include those properties. We've got 3 neighborhoods that we considered north side. You know, we've got a breakdown of a delineation of neighborhoods throughout the entire county so that we are able to look at sales congregated on similar properties. And so the 3 neighborhoods that we've got, that's what we have looked at. But what I'd like to do is to make sure that the properties that he is talking about are incorporated in what we consider north side. So I have asked him to give me a little more specific information so that we're sure that we are encompassing what we need to look at, you know, to review those properties.
Gotcha. And from my understanding, it wasn't just a few properties, but across the board, it seemed that the properties in Northside were very much overvalued based on the data presented. And so it seems that it wasn't necessarily a kind of case by case basis, but more of, I don't know what the word is, like structural, or the way that the appraisal was actually done. So I guess going off of Councilmember Buensi's question, is there any, I guess, reflection or looking at the process by which the current appraisal was gotten to, whatever the word is?
And well, the way that works is that we look at the sales for the areas. So for those 3 neighborhoods, what we've looked at is that there were 31 sales since the beginning of 2019 to the end of 2020. And those are the sales that we use to help us calculate the values for the properties in those neighborhoods. And in looking at that, we have, let me find the notes here so I can give you correct information.
You distinguish in the sales between properties that are used for income producing versus home ownership ones, because the north side has quite a few rental properties or student rentals that are owned by investors, and a few of those did sell in the last couple of years. So do you distinguish that at all?
If it's a qualified sale, we look at all the sales that happen in that area, and we qualify those based on the fact that they're an arm's length transaction, and we use those to value the properties. So looking
but
at
there
the
are
income would not be
fundamentally
part
2
of that.
different kinds of properties in
Yeah.
Northside. There are investor-owned properties that we not so affectionately call student stuffers, and then there are single-family owner-occupied, and they have very different price points because of the income potential of one versus the other. And so if you take the sales of an investor-owned property and apply that square footage number to owner-occupied units, you're going to most likely overvalue the owner-occupied. You really need to be more granular because they're very different kinds of properties, number one. And number two, I think the other thing that needs to be reflected is that the North Side is under a conservation district. So the highest and best use of the properties in that area, in fact, is fairly limited. And so again, you know, selling properties that may have been grandfathered in that have 6 or 7 bedrooms is going to vastly overstate the value of the more residential properties there. And so I think, you know, unfortunately, I recognize that that's not a simple task, but given the folks who live in Northside and given what's happening in terms of their, you know, property taxes versus their income, it's a very serious problem and really needs to be studied carefully.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I just want to add that also in terms of, you know, some of the data points that were presented to me, even with the actual sale value of some of the properties in Northside, they were being appraised at, I think I have it something like, you know, $58,000 above the market sale value. And it's sold within that time period that you just mentioned, whereas comparable properties in other areas were being appraised at significantly below whatever they recently sold at. So I think there was some concern about that as well, being presented by Mr. Vaughn as well as the NAACP.
I did take a look at the sales bank for the 3 neighborhoods that we believe are North Side. And the average sale price of the 31 sales that have happened over the last 2 years is $390,371.
Yeah, but you can't take, we're saying you can't take an
sales that are
average.
going on in that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
You can't take an average because of this disparity between longtime family-owned properties and the investment properties, which are income producers, which have sold for quite a, you know, the student stuffer properties. So you can't take an average and say that it works because it doesn't in this situation. It's one of the neighborhoods that's closest
Chad,
to
I may
campus.
be able to answer. Yeah. Chad, I don't know if you can answer that for me. As far as I know, there's not a delineation between the sales as far as what would be considered commercial in the home or whether it's considered just a regular sale from one homeowner to another.
Yeah, no, we haven't looked at that. Hadn't looked at whether or not it's income producing or whether it's just a regular residential.
Yeah, and it makes a huge, I mean, that would give you quite, your average would be way off because it just, the student stuffer investment homes are selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars, you know, and yeah. Karen's had her hand up patiently. Let's let her weigh in.
I just had one last thought comment, but I just wanted to make sure that the burden wasn't put on the individual Northside residents to go through the appeal process and through that, you know, that seems quite intense to me. And so just want to make sure that, you know, the county is bearing that burden, because that does not seem like an equitable resolution to that dire situation. But yeah, sorry about that, Karen.
That's no problem at all. Agree. Yeah, I just want to add to what's been said that we need to not forget about the Pine Knolls neighborhood. It's a very similar mix of students and longtime homeowners. So I want to make sure that that neighborhood is also being looked at. I'm not sure, I saw the materials, but I'm not sure how much Hudson and folks were able to dig into Pine Knolls as well, but I would hazard a guess that there may be a similar disconnect there. So I just want to make sure that we're including the Pine Knolls neighborhood as well. Yeah, definitely second Ty's comment about needing to look at how the county can go back and look at the data, as Michael said, in a more granular way and not take it house by house. There is clearly a broader issue than that. So, and we appreciate your willingness to do this. Chapel Hill is a very complex housing market with students, homeowners, different incomes. And so we really appreciate you being willing to do that. And it's really important. So I don't know if you want to have any kind of follow up or report back to us, or if there's a smaller group to report back. But I think that's really important for us that we get this right.
I can certainly include someone in the follow-up, because I will be, responding to our Board of Commissioners and to the county manager as well. So, I certainly can include someone from your office to in this as well.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
One thing that we were looking to do too, I know that some of the information that was provided in his presentation included the fact that some properties were undervalued. So those are properties that or areas that we would like to also look at and make sure that there are no errors in the appraisals that are done there. That's another part of what we're going to do. But and as I said before, if I can get him to give me more specifics so that we know we're pointed in the right direction. I don't intend to look at a single property and say, okay, we're done. But if I can make sure that we are looking at the ones that he knows he's pointed out are major problems, and so that we can make sure we incorporate those, that we are looking at the right areas. That's important to me, to make sure that we are not overlooking something. And at this point, he has not offered to give me much more than he has given me, than he gave in the original presentation. So we are working with what we've, with the information that we've got. I do have another map that is from the Jackson Center that shows more information about what's considered the north side area. So we're, going to take that into account as well, and make sure that we don't need to look at some other properties and expand our, our review.
And the north side is part of a neighborhood conservation district, so the zoning maps will also show you what the town has viewed as north side.
I did make a note of that, so we should be able to use that as well. And you said Pine Knolls as well, isn't that conservation? Okay. All right.
It's in a separate part of town, but it's a similar mix of housing types and residents.
It's close to downtown and the university as well.
And it has its own conservation district.
Part of it's in Carborough, so I don't know if we advocate for the whole thing, of course. Amy?
I just wanted to know if Mr. Vaughn had provided you with a list of which homes are investor owned and which are resident.
He is not.
Okay. Ty, do you know if that's something, or Karen, that the Jackson Center would have? I assume that
Empowerment had a map of it, so I know that they have a map of it.
Okay. So yeah, I would request that from them too. I think that will be a big help.
They've got the whole neighborhood drawn out, which ones are which. So we wanted to ask again, we struggle with this issue of how apartment buildings are listed as commercial tax base. And we know that that's a designation that you all make. And we were wondering if there could be, we had reached out before to ask if you could switch it to residential. And the answer was no, because they're income producing properties, so they're considered commercial. But could they have a sub designation of commercial-residential? The chamber was able to pull those numbers out in a presentation recently that showed commercial-residential, and then residential. It was really helpful in seeing the differences, because as we're trying to diversify our tax base and have more jobs and promote more workers and commercial tax base, it's hard to know where we are if we're having the apartment buildings lumped in there, as the apartment buildings don't provide that many jobs. So is there a way to have that subcategory? Would that be a workaround that would help us, that you could do?
Chad, I don't know if you can speak to that or not. You would know more about what we can pull out of the system.
We may be able to. Let me have to look at it. The only thing that I could think of right off that may be an issue is when we create the schedule of values every 4 years. That's approved by the Board of Commissioners, and this is the usages of the different codes and all that kind of things. So if we don't already have a code in there for apartment residential or commercial residential, like you're asking, we may not be able to add it, since we don't actually have it approved as a use code.
So if the commissioners approved it as a use code, could you then use it?
The only thing would be the schedule of values was already approved, but 5 months ago. But I would just need to look to see if it's something that we have or something similar that we have.
If we've already incorporated that, yeah.
Okay. Alan, you had another question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just had two more questions. So I'm wondering. So I think I'm correct in saying that at this stage, with respect to the matter that Mr. Vaughn has brought to the tax assessor's office, that's an informal review. Is that correct?
Correct. Until the end of April, it is informal. However, we would still have the ability, if we are not able to complete our research or get what we need to make a decision between now and then, that's still something that we would be able to bring to the Board of Equalization and Review for their approval.
Right.
If we find that there is a disparity and that we need to make changes, and that would be through the end of June. And certainly we would be able to, work through something at that point.
Right. So what's the standard of review for the informal review stage?
I'm sorry, the standard of review?
Yeah. So I know for at least some boards of equalization and review, the standard is presumption that the tax assessment is correct, and the burden is on the appellant to, reject that presumption. But I'm curious about is there a different standard of review at the informal stage, or is it the same as with the board?
Yeah, it would be the same. That it's based on case law that the tax assessor is considered right, and it's up to the appellant to prove otherwise. But one thing is if we, the tax office, come across something and we see that it's wrong, we can go to the board and say, hey, we believe this is wrong, and recommend the change. So then it would more be on us to show like, yes, this has got an error in it.
So, okay, so I'm sorry. So you're saying that staff does not have an obligation to inform the board, even if it thinks that its determination was off?
No, we would be able to go to the board and say,
yes, we would.
We think this is wrong. Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. I know that a member of the Jackson Center is listening tonight, and we will reach back out and have further conversations. I'm sure if I can ask a couple of board members to make sure that happens tomorrow, to figure out a process and to continue working with Ms. Freeman, Mr. Phillips on this issue, and to make sure that we're including Pine Knolls. So I ask them. Okay, great. Thank you. All right.
Yeah, I made a note of that so that we're able to look at that as well.
All right. Any more questions of our Orange County tax assessors? Thank you for the presentation. Thanks for giving us detailed information, and it has been recorded so other people can listen to it later and see what they can discern from this. And we encourage folks to go to the websites and check out the information about how to file an appeal or to find out what their house is actually listed, the components to make sure. Can you give us that web address again to verify? Do you have the screenshot for that, please? It came back pretty quickly. I was trying to catch it and I couldn't.
For the appeals website?
Yeah.
1 second. Let's go to.
And maybe we could ask our communications team as they publish the information from this meeting to include those links to those websites. That would be helpful too. The characteristics is spatialist. Ooh, there we go.
Okay, and then the next page actually just shows contact information for our office as well.
Thank you.
And I know I've seen this in the email as well, and I know that one of you mentioned this, that there was concern about the fact that the appeals process was very difficult, and we do. Our staff is in the office although we're not open to the public completely, we can set up a meeting with someone by Zoom or in person or by phone to help them with the appeals process. It's not us against them. It's us getting information and helping. We are here to help taxpayers. It's the appeals is not necessarily. We want to help the taxpayer if there is something wrong with the value and we don't have that information so that we can't value the property correctly. We want them to submit an appeal. We want to help them if they need help to submit an appeal so that we get the information correct and so that they are not paying more than the portion of the tax burden that they should. So please, and encourage people if they are concerned with their value to reach out to us and let us help them with their appeal. We can walk them through doing it on the website. We can talk to them on the phone about how to fill out the paperwork, or they can come into the office and we can help them fill out the paperwork.
Thank you.
Thank you. Y'all have a good
Amy?
evening.
Thanks. Amy, we have another presenter.
Yes, Maurice and myself.
Oh, good. Okay.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay. So good evening again, Mayor and Council. My name is Amy Oland. I'm the Director of Business Management. I'm here tonight and will be joined by Town Manager Maurice Jones to provide information on the development of the fiscal year 22 budget in advance of the presentation of the manager's recommended budget on May 5th. Our presentation this evening is 14 slides, and I can't say how long it will take because it's really intended to be a back and forth discussion with council. So hopefully we'll have a really good conversation. So the topics for this evening are a comparison of the town's assessed valuation data. What is the value of a penny on the tax rate? Some example tax bill impacts for both residential and commercial properties, a look at the town's tax rate history, a list of the fiscal year 21 budget reductions that the town made, and a list of the fiscal year 2022 budget commitments that we already have in place. Looking at some budget scenarios for council discussion, and to take a look at the next steps in the budget process. So we thought it would be helpful to begin tonight's discussion with a look at the town's assessed valuation data. The chart here shows the components that make up the town's tax base, which include both Orange County and Durham County real property, which, as Nancy mentioned, is all land and real structures in Chapel Hill, and Orange and Durham motor vehicles. So the 2021 valuation data will be used to compute the 2021 tax bills, which is the revenue that we will collect in fiscal year 22, compared to the 2020 valuation, which was used to compute the current year's tax bill, the fiscal year 21 revenue. Let's see. So looking at the revaluation, which can be seen, the impact can be seen in the Orange County real property line, we saw a 13.51% increase in our assessed valuation tax base based on the reval that was just completed. The town typically sees an average growth, as Nancy also mentioned, of about 1.5% per year. So it's a big change. The one outlier in the data here you can see is related to the motor vehicles number for Durham County. While it's a really small piece of the tax base, we're not sure that the valuation information that was shared with the town is accurate. So we have followed back up with Durham County, but have not yet heard back. So as soon as we have information from them, we will loop back with you to either get a corrected number or an explanation for what's going on with those numbers.
Amy?
Yes.
Yeah, Amy, I have a question for Amy.
Sure. Amy to Amy.
So on the 13% difference in the Orange County, do we have any idea how much of that is increase in valuation and how much of that is new development coming online?
No, and if you noted, Nancy did mention that that is not a distinction that they can make, which I don't know why, but their system does not afford the ability to make that differentiation, which makes it difficult for us as we begin to talk about the impacts of the reval.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay, so looking at the value of a penny. So the value of a penny tells us how much 1 cent on the tax rate generates in property tax revenue. It's calculated by taking the total assessed valuation of all real and personal property in Chapel Hill and multiplying that by the tax rate per $100 of assessed valuation. So for fiscal year 21, the penny generated $840,000 in tax revenue. And in fiscal year 22, the penny will generate $940,000, which is about a 12% increase. So I know when we came before you a couple weeks ago at our first work session, there was some questions about what this impact would look like for both residential and commercial properties. So there are a lot of variables that go into computing the impacts of the revaluation, but we thought that we would come and try and give some examples for you with a few assumptions built into this. Looking at the residential tax bill impacts, a couple assumptions that we built in as we calculated some of these examples. First of all, this is only looking at the town tax rate, and it is using our existing tax rate of 54.4 cents. As Nancy shared,
could you refresh my memory? Is that the total tax rate or is this the general fund tax? Does this
total tax rate.
So it includes the debt service and it includes the transit fund?
Yes, it does.
And it doesn't include, for those of us who are honored to, the downtown tax.
It does not, yes, and that's an additional 7 cents. Yes. As Nancy mentioned earlier, the average growth that was seen in residential properties across Chapel Hill was 9%. So we've used 9% in our calculations. Of course, we know that is just the average of all residential properties. Some will see a higher percentage of growth, some will see a lower percentage of growth, and some might even see a decline. So according to Orange County, and Nancy shared this in her presentation, the average home price in Chapel Hill is $483,643. So we use that as the median example here. And then the chart here shows some sample properties, what their pre-revaluation assessed valuation was, what their tax bill would have been, let's say for the current year, what the post-reval value looks like, assuming the 9% average growth, the post-revaluation tax bill, and then the annual increase, just so you have in context what that might look like for a taxpayer. So the one thing we did want to point out is that we know that the revaluation impacts households differently, and we are exploring some opportunities to find some tax relief options. I know the county has some options. They have the homestead exemption, but we're also working with some of our nonprofit partners. We're considering a donation program similar to what we did for the emergency housing relief for homeowners who meet specific income thresholds and who have seen a significant increase in their tax bill. And we'll come back before council with additional information on what such a program or programs could look like.
Amy, when you say a donation program, are you referring to individuals in the community making donations? So is there any prohibition? Let's just say that we felt there were many taxpayers who were really going to struggle, right? And we decided that there one or more not-for-profits in town had the bandwidth and the reach to help those folks. Would there be any prohibition for the town giving a significant amount of money to one or more of those not-for-profits who could then make grants to taxpayers who are substantially impacted by a tax increase?
Well, there are some limitations, and we're actually having conversations with our town attorney. We cannot use our town certain of our town revenues for such purpose. There might be revenue sources that are able to be used for that purpose. And so we're looking at statutes closely now to see what that looks like. The donation program, for example, could be used because it's very clearly stated that someone would be donating on behalf of. So that's a pretty easy example to use. But there are certainly nonprofit partners that we can work with to see what kind of options there are. And we're looking to see if there are certain revenue sources that the town takes in that would be allowable under statute to use for such purpose.
Thank you.
So we also wanted to take a look at some examples of commercial tax bill impacts. This is a little bit harder because property valuations vary more significantly than they do for residential. To just share a little bit about the assumptions that we made. Again, we are only looking at the town tax rate, the existing tax rate of 54.4 cents. Again, as Nancy shared earlier, the average growth that commercial properties saw with this reval was 36%. So we've used that for the growth rate. Again, we know that some people will see a higher growth, some lower, and some might have seen a decline. But we just tried to put together a couple of examples to share the best information that we have. So the one thing with the commercial tax bills that we wanted to share is, again, we know that some of our businesses have been impacted from the pandemic and they're trying to recover from the effects. So we're working with our economic development staff to discuss a small business assistance program that could potentially be offered through the American Response Act funds that we will be receiving sometime before mid-May to help offset some of the short-term impacts of the pandemic. And this could be direct grants to businesses or marketing on their behalf. As we have more information and work through such ideas of a program, we'll be coming back to council to share additional information.
Jess, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. Amy, you have in your parentheses town rate only. And I know a lot of our decisions are influenced by what the county does. So I'm just wondering, I know you have additional slides, but I didn't see it in there either. So I figured now would be an okay time to ask about what that looks like and also how we can potentially impact or advocate for what the county does, given that it always impacts town and town residents because we get, you know, our tax rate is pretty average and the county is not. So I'm just wondering how that plays out.
That's a great question. Yeah, it's a little bit complicated. I mean, we use the town rate only because we can only control our portion of the tax rate. And so we just wanted to put in context what the average reval impact would look like for both commercial and for residential. We know that the town is only one piece of the tax rate. We also have the county and the schools, and as Councilmember Parker mentioned, we also have the downtown for the businesses and homeowners in that area. So it is very complicated as we consider how we should address our tax rate, knowing that the county and the schools could be making decisions that also impact those same taxpayers.
And I'd add, we're not sure what the tax rates will be at this point for Orange and for the schools. That information has not been made public just yet. And so we're not sure where they're going to land on that.
And is there a process in place for the towns to work with the county in order to kind of create a reasonable scenario for residents, or in order for us to work together so that we're not kind of both raising taxes at the same time? I'm not suggesting that we are raising taxes and we're not, that's not what I'm saying, but just that is there a way for us to synchronize those decisions, or is it really just we come up with a few scenarios and see what the county does, or, I think I
think-
know how it's worked in the past. I'm just wondering if there are opportunities.
I mean, I think the way the way it is worked here and probably in most municipalities around the state is that each jurisdiction will make their own decisions based on what their needs are and what they feel they can afford to do and the impact that it has on their taxpayers. I'm not aware of, and maybe Amy is, of other localities that are coordinating their tax rates based on overall impact on the taxpayer. I mean, we certainly take that into consideration. I'm sure they do in Orange individually, but I don't think there's been coordination, as far as I know, between our jurisdictions in the past. Amy, are you aware of any?
Yeah, I don't have any
other-
additional information
Yeah.
on that. I think ideally, yes, it's not always possible. Obviously, each jurisdiction and the county, they all have services that they are providing and needs that they have and are trying to address those needs. And sometimes they're in conflict and sometimes they are not. And there's not a great process for that.
So is that something that we could look towards, is figuring out, and I understand we can only control ourselves, but I'm just wondering if that's something that we could request or look towards, not because we want to tell others what to do, but because we want to make good decisions. And Chapel Hill and Carrboro and Hillsborough and the little part of Mebane are Orange County residents. So it has a huge impact. And it really does, the combination is really intense for a lot of people. So I'm just wondering if there is a way to initiate a better process.
Yeah, I think that I think we certainly could raise that with Orange County and our partners in Carrboro and Hillsborough as well, and see if they're interested in having those types of discussions. It probably wouldn't happen for this next fiscal year.
Understood.
That would have to be a long-term change in approach, I think, but certainly would be willing to have that conversation and see if there's mutual interest there.
That would be great.
I do think the staffs meeting together, the managers of all those districts meeting and talking about the needs helps quite a bit. That's something that's been relatively new, and talking that through about what it looks like for the citizen at the end of the line, because you add in the school tax as well, and you've got some huge numbers there going on. I saw Amy Ryan, then Hongbin. I'm sorry, Maurice, did you have?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, Amy, if you want to put the next slide up, I think we're done with this one. It just gives you a sense of that as well, but we'll continue to take questions.
Okay, we'll have Amy Ryan followed by Hongbin.
Yeah, I did. Could we go back to the commercial?
No, sorry.
That's okay. I just looking at this and the earlier residential slide, it looks like the percentage increase for the commercial properties is quite a bit heftier than it is for the residential properties. We can't differentiate between those two though, correct? Okay.
We cannot.
Okay, thank you.
Hongbin.
So I think that what the number that you just showed is the residential in Chapel Hill increases 9%, for the commercial is 36%. But I also heard that you're saying that those like apartment buildings, that the new apartment buildings, they're counted in category for the commercial. So in that case, let's say Dayston, the small Dayston, I mean, its tax value versus the one that the huge, the Elliott apartment complex. So I can imagine the increase is going to be huge. And that, I think their data point is going to be swayed the mean, which is the average number of 36% significantly. So I think at this time point, I think it's crucial for us to understand what kind of increase it is from the year to year, like the same building, same business, how much property increase, the value increase is for that business versus like Dayston has been rebuilt and redeveloped into a huge apartment complex. I think it's very important for us to differentiate these things before we are going to make a the policy decision of what's the impact it's going to have for the like average residents and average businesses living in the same building. So I heard Orange County said that they cannot differentiate that, but from my data analysis point of view, I think it should be not, really shouldn't be, even if they're not coded in the system, that information, whether or not it's new development into the system. I think you can look at the change, let's say day seen from before to after, that's like several hundred % of increase versus others, small increases of 10% or 20% that increase. I think you can look at the data distribution. So I don't know if they have the capacity of doing that. If they don't have that, I'm sure that there will be people in the communities willing to do that analysis. If they're, I don't know if it's open, the text data can be openly released to the community, then we can have people to do the analysis and to give them the support. I mean, it doesn't have to go public, but I'm just saying if they need the technical support, I certainly can find people willing to do that for them. Shouldn't be, unless there's some legal concerns that for them to like preventing them from doing that. I mean, technically, I certainly can see a lot of tools to accomplish that.
I will just say the chamber's been able to look at that information and put some out there. It can't be considered the actual, it can't be validated, I guess, by the county, but the chamber actually produces that kind of information. And that I was impressed. They separated out the commercial residential too in order to do that. So it's interesting. So there are people who know how to look at that data and dissect it.
So the chamber has the data.
It has some. I don't know who did the data for them, but they presented it at the State of the Community and some other events they've had. They've presented that kind of data, so, and the growth and stuff. So
yeah, well, I think they use the census data that they're released by Census Bureau. It's probably not as up to date as the Orange County data. So, but I mean, I think it doesn't hurt to ask if they're willing to accept that kind of assistance or support from the community. I think there are lots of people in the community would be willing to help.
Yeah, we'd have to check with Ms. Freeman on that. And as you mentioned, Councilmember Gu, there may be some legal issues associated with that as well, but we can certainly follow up with Ms. Freeman on that.
Michael?
Yeah, following up on what Hangbin said, I think, I mean, when you look at it and you see 50 million going up to 68 million, and, it's basically an increase of $100,000 in just our taxes. But I think it would be helpful, and this should be something that Orange County can get to us, or we can figure out quite easily, is how many of them actually are there? So are we looking at, 5, 10, 50? I think, we need to look at the frequency distribution of the various sizes of commercial properties to really understand, how big a problem is it and for whom is it a big problem? And I think there are a number of ways that can be done.
We can ask about that.
Let's take us to the next slide, please.
So we just wanted to take a moment to review the town's tax rate history since fiscal year 2009 and look at the total tax rate. We've talked a little bit about that in the last few minutes, that a residential or commercial property owner pays by also including the Orange County and schools tax rate. As you can see the history there, the town's tax rate makes up about 34% of the total combined tax bill. And we know that the town's tax rate remains in the middle of its peer group of North Carolina cities with populations over 50,000. The town, county, and school district all rolled back our tax rates to the revenue neutral rate in fiscal year 2010 and fiscal year 2018. But you can see kind of the evolution of the tax rate and what's happened there over the course of the last 9 years, kind of the ebb and flow there. On the next slide, we'll see, we wanted to take some time to review the list of the items that were reduced in fiscal year 21 in order to offset revenue shortfalls that we were anticipating as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. These are items that we hoped would be one-time cuts, and we plan to restore in fiscal year 22 if we could. They include a reduction in street maintenance of $300,000, elimination of vehicle replacement funding at $453,000, the elimination of our PAYGO capital funding at $237,000, a reduction of $250,000 in our OPEB pre-funding contribution, the elimination of the transfer to the Blue Hill tax increment financing, our TIF, to pay for debt service, that's $445,000. We eliminated $472,000 from the building maintenance fund and reduced about $100,000 from the library and community arts and culture. We all did that anticipating that the budget for fiscal year 21 was going to be pretty tight because of the pandemic, not really knowing how it was going to affect us. And we had a total of $2.2 million in reductions that we proposed to the council, and the council voted on last year. As we began preparing for fiscal year 22, we recognized that there were already some commitments that were in place that needed to be accounted for. For instance, health insurance. The town's health insurance brokers have been negotiating with Blue Cross Blue Shield to help attain the best possible rate for us, and they've been able to negotiate our rate down to 5.5% of an increase for our health insurance for next year. That still may change before the budget is finalized. Negotiations will continue, and it often does change, but we know now it will probably go up on some level for next year. The North Carolina Local Government Employees Retirement System has approved a statewide 1.2% increase to the employer retirement contribution, and so we'll have to take that on for next fiscal year. The town needs to reinstate the transfer for the Blue Hill TIF to pay the debt service for the Elliott Road reconstruction project. The town is also has several development incentive agreements in place that will be part of the fiscal year 22 budget. The total of those agreements is $985,000 and includes Caraway Village, Wegmans, Well Inc., and WellDOT Inc. and Glenn Lennox. As you know, the town entered into those agreements to help bring businesses into Chapel Hill to invest in economic development. The net effect of those agreements is that we delay some of the growth of the tax base for a number of years. We'll still see some growth, but we will not feel the full effects of that until those incentives agreements are completed. This is further compounded by the reevaluation, because it's important for everyone to know that if we do roll back to the revenue neutral tax rate, we would lose a good portion of the tax growth that we had anticipated receiving because those three projects were coming in line in the same year as the reval. So just something for us to consider. We won't feel the same effects from it if we were to revert back to revenue neutral at this point. The town is still anticipating revenue reductions as a result of the pandemic in the areas of parks and recreation, or occupancy taxes, and possibly the school resource officer program. We mentioned this to you all previous meetings that we've seen a significant hit in parks and recreation and our occupancy taxes. And we're just not sure at this point what the schools will be doing with the school resource officer program. But as a result of the pandemic and their review of the SRO program, we do not have officers, school resource officers in the schools at this point, and there's a reduction in revenue that's a part of that as well. Something else to consider as we're making these decisions. So the good news is that the sales tax revenue next year may cover those commitments. Historically, the town has been able to make additions to the town budget as a result of our modest property tax growth and our stable sales tax growth. This changed as a result of our concerns about the effects of the pandemic. However, while we anticipated a significant drop to our sales tax revenues, we have not actually experienced a decrease on the sales tax. The town has instead seen strong sales tax growth in the first 7 months of the year at over 10%. The League of Municipalities is estimating that statewide sales tax growth for our current fiscal year will be 13.5%. That's fiscal year 21. And they have projected a conservative estimate for fiscal year 22 of 2.5%. So based on the numbers we are experiencing right now and the guidance from the league, we feel fairly confident that sales tax will cover those fiscal year 22 budget commitments that we just discussed. So that's good news, and that we'll be able to cover that. So that leaves us with looking at the property tax revenues to address our organizational priorities. you want to stop there and if there are any questions or thoughts before we move on to the?
Sure, Karen?
Maurice, thank you for that. I was just wondering of the cuts that we had to make in FY21, are any of these costs going to be able to be covered or reimbursed by the federal funding that we're expecting?
Well, so yeah, possibly, yes. We're looking at that right now. We haven't received specific guidelines on how that money can be spent. We do know it can be spent to help close the gaps that folks have suffered from. And we've talked to this council about, the fact that our Parks and Rec revenue is down significantly because of the pandemic. We feel pretty comfortable at this point that we could use the American Rescue Plan dollars to help close that gap. Same with the occupancy tax, based on where we would normally have been. We could probably close that gap as well. And then will inevitably be some other things that we believe that we could use that money for, but we haven't received specific guidance from the federal government just yet. We're hoping to receive that over the course of the next 10, 15, 20 days. And that will help us have a better understanding of what we can use that money for. And it might be used to help offset some of the other costs or loss that we've had because we had to make those tough decisions over the pandemic.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. So as part of council's agenda packet, we included a handout with several tax rate scenarios for fiscal year 22. And we thought it would be helpful to walk through a couple of those scenarios with you and provide an opportunity for discussion. So the scenarios are, rolling back the revenue to the revenue neutral tax rate, which in this case would be 49.4%, 49.4 cents. Another option is remaining at the existing tax rate of 54.4% or 54.4 cents. And then there's also opportunities to look at alternatives for council to consider between that revenue neutral tax rate and the existing tax rate with a range of 5 cents on the tax rate to work with. So anywhere in there we could land as well based on what council wanted to invest in. So here's scenario number one. This is what it looks like at our priorities in a revenue neutral situation. If we decide to go with 49.4%, this scenario only allows us to include the health insurance increase and the Ephesus Fordham TIF transfer as new items to fund at this point. Any thoughts or questions about that?
Maurice.
Michael,
Sorry.
Amy had her hand up. Thank you.
So for instance, in the affordable housing line, does that mean we would be cutting that budget or we would not be increasing that budget?
No, we just would not be increasing that. Just wanted to be clear. We're not talking about further cuts for any of these items on here. It would just be maintaining them at their current levels for next fiscal year.
Thank you.
Sure.
Michael, then Karen.
Yeah, Maurice, what are you assuming for next year, given vaccinations and whatnot, in terms of, and again, they're not huge impacts, but what are you assuming in terms of Parks and Rec revenues and occupancy tax revenues for next year? Are you assuming, just generally speaking, some return to normality, no return, or,
Absolutely. Yeah, we have factored in some return to what we had experienced prior to the pandemic. I think, Amy, you can help me out here. I think you reduced it to about $300,000 loss or gap with Parks and Recreation based on where we were in the past. So we closed the gap, but we don't completely close it. Is that correct?
Yes. So the idea was that specifically related to the summer programming, that we knew that we wouldn't have the same number of campers. So they're running the programs, but they don't have the same number of kids. And so they tried to take a conservative approach, recognizing that programs wouldn't be running at full capacity and facilities wouldn't be opening at full capacity. And so kind of phased in to returning to normal programming. So it wound up being about $330,000 decrease there. Similar scenario for occupancy tax, we had a really hard time when we tried to project that budget for the current year and didn't do a great job because we just didn't really know the longevity and full effect, of the pandemic. And so we tried to do a similar approach, recognizing that there would be a somewhat slower return to people feeling comfortable to travel. And we knew that the university planned to return in the fall. And so we thought that it was pretty safe to assume that, by the time we reached next spring, when we see like our largest numbers, that we would be mostly back to normal, but kind of a slow and steady approach now over the next several months.
Karen, then Jess.
Not to get it too into the weeds, but I wanted to ask specifically about climate action, since we didn't have any climate action funding other than to develop the plan. When you say there won't be more money, is there some money in this scenario towards climate action?
Well, not specifically to the climate action response plan. We obviously, there are things that we invest in that are spread out amongst the organization that is not necessarily part of a climate action response plan. We do have, in the next scenario, gives you a sense of what we were thinking in terms of being responsive to the plan and trying to be aggressive in taking next steps. And that would be to fund it at a level of about $940,000. And the reasoning behind that, as I've been thinking about the plan over the course of the last few months, is, we a number of years ago, council took a very aggressive and assertive step to try to address affordable housing. We've done a lot with affordable housing over the years. And we felt that we needed to be bold in addressing climate action as well, and felt that a penny for our climate action response plan would make a lot of sense and would really take an important step forward for addressing that. So that's why you'll see on the next slide, we're looking at that penny for climate change.
Okay, thank you.
Jess, then Alan. You're muted, Jess.
Thank you. Maurice, my understanding is that along with the federal recovery money, that we get an allotment, but that there's also some competitive funds that are available. Is that right?
There's if you're talking about the program, the earmark program that's been put in place across the nation, there's a competitive process for that. We've applied for some projects there to help offset some costs or move some projects forward. But it's a relatively small amount of money that we would be competing for within Congressman Price's district. So I'm sure there are others who have applied for that.
I see. Oh, we saw a list of the ones that we had submitted to his office. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And so are there any other competitive opportunities at this
Oh,
point?
sure. Yeah. And we're always looking for grant opportunities. Our library has been, exceptional at identifying grant opportunities and applying for grants and securing them. Transit's always looking for opportunities to secure grants. So yes, without question, we look for opportunities on a fairly regular basis to do that. We don't, however, have very many folks, if any, whose sole job it is to write grants for us. Usually it's part of someone's job in a department like our library or in Chapel Hill Transit. But we do secure a number of grants to help offset costs and sometimes make sure that we can do some new things as well.
Yeah. So I guess part of my question is clearly what other Recovery Act funds are there? And then, like you said, what are we doing about grant writers? And is that part of our recommended or potentially recommended budget to have ways to actually go after those funds, since it seems like this is the time when a lot of money is going to be funneling down?
Yeah, so just to kind of walk you through what we know right now, right? You have the American Rescue Plan, and we know that we're going to get about $10.4 million broken up over 2 fiscal years. So the first $5 million, $5.2 million will come to us in the next 30 to 45 days or so. And then hopefully, as we mentioned before, we'll get the specific guidelines associated with that as well. And then a year from now, we'll get the additional $5.2 million from that plan that we can utilize at that point. In addition to that, right now, obviously, there's some discussion taking place in Washington, D.C. about an infrastructure bill that would help with building additional infrastructure in our country to address issues related to aging infrastructure like bridges and our roads and that type of thing, which of course we've talked about with our own issues here in Chapel Hill. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. There may be some additional funding coming to localities, states and localities to help address that, and that can help offset some costs for us as well. We do not have right now a plan to include full-time grant writers in the process. We were able to very quickly pull together those submissions for the federal dollars that I just spoke of, that Congressman Price's office alerted us to, and they were very helpful with providing us with some guidance on that. Thankfully, we've got a number of shovel-ready projects out there that we were able to move fairly quickly to pull together our applications for and get those submitted in time. We didn't have a whole lot of time to do it, and I think our staff worked really hard to make that happen. So it's really important for us to make sure we continue to have shovel-ready projects out there just in case these opportunities pop up, and we'll continue to do that. That was a helpful lesson to learn in that situation, that those things come up fairly quickly. And it's been a while, right? I mean, if you recall, there hasn't been earmark money out there for quite some time from the federal government. I think it was done away with about 15 years ago to maybe a little bit less than that, 12 years ago or so. And it's relatively new and coming back to the federal government and spread out across the country.
Right. Yeah. We used to get funding for buses, God forbid. Like, yeah, we used to get stuff.
And we still do get transportation dollars from the federal government, but maybe not in the form of earmarks.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess I'm wondering then, beyond the shovel ready, what are we doing to be able to do that grant writing? Because we're not, I mean, and I don't know that it's a full-time position, or I don't even know what that looks like. I'm just wondering, how then are we?
I mean, we've had some discussions about it. You know, and a grant writer could be very effective at finding dollars for, you know, a lot of times for one-time expenses, right? For capital expenses or programs that have sunsets on them, that type of thing. And those that can be very beneficial to a community. What a grant writer is not going to do is find extra dollars for you to spend on like ongoing salaries or ongoing expenses and that type of thing. And so when we sit down and we talk about what our needs are within an organization, you know, we have a lot of needs, and we've had conversations with council about the things that you all would like to see. And as part of this budget, depending on where we land, we'll have some of those new positions in place to help us in the future. And a grant writer right now just it's not at the top of that list of, like, for instance, new positions that we've talked to council about previously. You know, we're in the process of hiring a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer. We are working on developing a job description for a data analytics position that we've talked to the council about. And those have tended to be positions that have kind of risen above hiring a full-time grant writer. So, I mean, it's certainly something we can consider if the dollars are there in the future.
Understood.
Sure.
Okay. Alan's next, so the time is getting nigh, so let's continue, let our staff.
Actually, Maurice, in his answers there, actually answered my question as well.
Yeah, well, I will, sorry not to, but the parking fund, we know, took a major hit this last year. It's not on this list, but I know that as we go forward with parking concerns, if you can help us understand where that falls into this and where the new positions fall into.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think that at least in terms of what we've struggled with in the last year or so because of the pandemic, we will be able to use, we believe, American Rescue Fund plan funds to help to help offset those costs and help balance that budget for this current fiscal year and possibly for next fiscal year as well. But in terms of other needs, we're still kind of evaluating that in terms of additional positions in the future, that type of thing. So so right now, I think we're in decent shape with parking from a operational standpoint, but there will be certainly in the future, there'll be some other things that we need to consider.
All right, take us to the next slide.
So scenario number 2 takes a look at what priorities the town can address without any changes to existing operations and programs at the existing tax rate of 54.4 cents. This scenario allows us to address many of council's priorities, including providing a 2% market pay adjustment to invest in our employees who provide the services that our community enjoys. It helps to cover the health insurance increase, the emphasis Fordham TIF transfer, as I mentioned before, dedicating a penny for our climate action programs and next steps there, bringing our existing penny for housing up to an actual value of a penny. We're not currently there, but this would help us get to $940,000 to invest in affordable housing, adding back the cuts we made to the OPEB pre-funding, building maintenance funding, our vehicle replacement funds as well, our streets repaving funding, the PAYGO capital funding, and the library funding that we reduced in fiscal year 21. We've also had discussions with council the last couple of years about the possibility of creating a council reserve for projects that come up during the year that weren't under consideration as part of the budget process, and this would allow council to have some funding once guidelines and policies are put in place that could be used for those projects that pop up during the year that meet council priorities. Any thoughts or questions about this list?
Amy?
Yeah, just you don't have to answer this now, but going forward, I don't know whether building maintenance, whether that covers our backlog, covers 1 year of backlog, covers 1/10 of the backlog we have. So just going forward, if we can have information on that.
We can
Thank you.
absolutely do that for you for sure.
Okay. What's behind curtain number 3?
So slide number 13, I believe it is. Scenario number 3 takes a look at what options the town has between the revenue neutral tax rate of 49.4% and the existing tax rate of 54.4 cents. Each penny on the tax rate is equal, as we mentioned earlier, to $940,000 in funding that can be contributed or attributed to council's priorities, including climate action, affordable housing. We had a discussion with you recently, last Friday, I guess it was, on Revive Chapel Hill. That's our efforts to help our community grow after the pandemic. The infrastructure and maintenance issues that we've talked to you about before, being responsive to the Reimagining Community Safety Task Force recommendations. We may not know those recommendations in detail before this budget has to be finalized, but we have talked about putting some funding aside that could at least be a first step in addressing some of those recommendations. And then, as I mentioned before, investing in our town employees and the council reserve as well, and maybe other priorities that come up for council as we go through this budget process over the course of the next couple of months.
Michael?
Yeah, this isn't big money, but just to sort of for the sake of accuracy, right? So our debt service funds were predicated on the revenues that we've been getting, not getting new revenues from increased valuations. So we could theoretically keep the debt service fund at a revenue neutral rate while having the operating funds at some other number, right?
We could. Amy, do you want to talk a little bit more about the effect of that?
Yes, we have recently provided an update to council where we shared that, based on a number of decisions and some projects being delayed, the debt service fund for now is in decent shape. For the scenarios that we have put together for council, we did assume that the growth that we are experiencing would be given to the general fund, and we would be holding both the debt fund and the transit fund. Flats, and mostly because of the I think the solid condition of the debt fund, and in relation to the transit fund, they are receiving a significant amount of money from the CARES Act and also from the American Rescue Plan. And so we thought, at least for now, they were in pretty solid condition as well. And the general fund is really the one that has a very long list of needs. So it made sense to us to put that forward as sort of our recommendation.
Thank you.
Okay. Keep moving us along, please.
Sure. So what we're asking for council, as we've talked about the last couple of weeks, is some guidance to know generally what tax rate would be included in the manager's recommended budget. A point to remember is that this is a step in the budgeting process. We will still provide the entire budget for your consideration and the public's consideration in the next few weeks, followed by additional opportunities to hear from the public and for you to discuss with the staff and each other the budget and our priorities for next year. The decision tonight and guidance tonight helps us understand the parameters of what we're working with within our budget. And one other note to consider too, that the council can, if you give us the go ahead to advertise, for instance, at the current tax rate, that can always come down after we engage the public and have a deeper discussion about what our priorities are and the impact it's going to have on our citizens as well. It's much easier to reduce the tax rate afterwards. It can still be done. There's enough time to do it. But if we get much further down the road and decide we're going to increase the tax rate, we'd have to re-advertise and hold, another public hearing and that type of thing, and it takes a couple of weeks to happen to occur. So just wanted you to be aware of that as well.
Okay. Maurice, do you have any idea when the county is going to give you any kind of inkling to release their numbers? Because, I mean, we really do try to look at it holistically. I know we haven't coordinated with them on all this exactly, but it's going to be, we're trying to help our community bounce back out of this recession that the pandemic has caused. And there's so many folks that are between residential folks and businesses that are struggling so hard that I think is on top of our mind. We would love to do all these things, but the reality is that not everybody's going to be able to stay in our community if we do all these things. So we're trying to figure out what the overall impact, and when will you have any inkling? Do you know when they're going to?
I think they're still in the process of making a final decision about their budget as well. And I've not heard specifics about what they plan to do, for instance, with their tax rate just yet. I can reach out again and see if we can get a number.
Michael?
Yeah, I don't know if this is doable or not, but given the extraordinary circumstances we've been under and will be under, and as Pam said, the hurt that some folks are experiencing. Is there any way to sort of take, let's say, a 2-year view of this? So say, if we said, well, we'll do this much this year, and then while we can't legally commit to it, but at least telegraph that we would anticipate, in order to get to where, we wouldn't get to do everything in the first year, but we would spread it out over 2 years so that it would mitigate the impact. And also for those, particularly for the businesses that might be experiencing a fairly large increase, they would have time to adjust and prepare for it.
Yeah, and when we started our conversation, it's a great question. When we started our conversation with council a couple of years ago about our long-term needs, we focused on kind of our 5-year budget strategy. And as you recall, we worked pretty hard on that strategy. We were just having conversations with the council about it right before the pandemic hit last year. And one approach that we were talking about with that was, obviously we couldn't do everything in one fell swoop. There are a lot of needs. It's deep. There's a lot of funding that needs to be allocated in future years in order to address our deficits and then also invest in new things that we want to invest in. So one of the things that we talked about internally was, do you have a discussion about what our priorities are with the council and with the public, and then lay out a plan for how you may get there. Once again, as you said, you can't obligate future councils to do those things, but you can say this is our intention, right? Is to try to invest in these really important these really important services that we want to offer, but it may take some time to get there. So that's certainly something that council could do, and then we would work with council on how best to get there. But obviously there are a lot of needs, and there are some things that we're proposing that gets us back to kind of baseline with some of these things, like we've talked about with maintenance and with some of our infrastructure investments in streets and sidewalks and our fleet as well. It's just, those are areas that we've been cutting back on. We've dug a little bit of a hole there, and we're trying to dig out of that hole now, trying to find a way to get out of it. So we would have a good discussion with council about, well, what does this mean if we're going taking an incremental approach to investing in these things. So we could certainly have that discussion with council and look at a way to build back to where we need to be in order to not only fund the things that we've reduced, but also to invest in those really important and new services.
So I'm hoping you're not asking us to make a judgment call tonight on which scenario, because for me, at least, I'll say I need to have a better understanding of where we're going to spend our American Rescue Plan monies and what holes it could plug for us. If it could help with some maintenance backlog and things, we might not need to. I guess my goal is to not raise taxes so much that we push people out of community or close businesses down. So I'm going to need to see more about that balance. And I know you don't have the guidelines yet. I get that. So you weren't expecting us this evening to tell you scenario.
No, not necessarily. Well, but what we're asking for, I think I mentioned, is kind of the parameters, right? I mean, so what if councils are you open to the idea of of us considering that neutral revenue neutral rate, knowing that if we find out over the course of the next month or so that we can reduce that and use some of the American Rescue Plan money to help cover some costs there, that would be something that we would be willing to consider and certainly open to. But we do need to have a general sense of where council is so that we can put this the manager's recommended budget to bed and have it to you all and to the public in enough time so that you can think about it and consider it as we enter into the formal budget season in May.
Amy, Ryan.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think about is we just approved a pretty ambitious climate action plan and with very strong language in that resolution. So I think we're obligated to invest in that. Otherwise, that was an empty action. So, for me, that's just one place. I'm also concerned about the backlog on maintenance. I know Chapel Hill Transit at one point with their buses was really having a hard time with an aging fleet, and turning that around was a big effort, but it put them in a much better place. So I'd like to make sure that we're doing that with our backlog on maintenance and buildings and roads and that kind of thing. And again, I think to Pam's point, with any luck, we'll be getting infrastructure money for that or relief money. So, obviously we'd use that first, but those are just first thoughts.
And that's helpful as well for us if you have some thoughts on some of the things that we talked about in terms of potential investments, because that will help us determine where we kind of land on the tax rate.
On Ben, then Michael.
I think the scenario you presented, revenue neutral versus existing rate, I think, well, of course, for the revenue neutral, there are only two items that you listed will be able to cover and nothing else. But I think there are other items that I think almost I cannot imagine that we're not going to do. Let's say the adjustment of the employees' pay. I think we need to take a look at what is the adjustment. Well, from what I have learned from the state employee and the UNC staff, the employee, the increase is a lot more significant than like 2% you're proposing. So I really think that is not like wish list the kind of thing. It is in order to maintain our town's workforce. Well, I'm afraid that we're not, competitive with the neighboring towns, like Cary or the other, the Durham or Raleigh. I want to know what their pay adjustment is. So in order for us to maintain a healthy, stable workforce. There are things that we have to do. I just feel like that is, I almost not going to put that in the optional category. I think in the scenarios that you laid out, I think we need to list those things. I think that if we do not do, that's going to negatively impact our town's overall, the health or the general functioning of the town. I think we need to separate them from the other wish lists. Of course, these things are all important. I think all the things that you look at, they're all important, but maintenance, infrastructure, these things, I also think it's not optional, or at least not forever. We have delayed that many times already. And if we do not catch up with them, they're going to be very cost expenses in the very near future if we do not do that. So I think these things, we need to show the urgencies of these things instead of like putting all of them, say, these are all the things you can pick and choose. I think there are things that, from what my understanding of these items, I think there are different levels of urgency or the necessity that we have to consider.
Okay, thank you.
Michael and Jess.
Yeah, I'll be real quick. I mean, I think given the way you've shown it to us, I just don't think that, you know, the pure revenue neutral scenario is viable under basically, you know, unless somebody comes along and, you know, dumps a lot of money at town hall someday. Failing that, I think, you know, I don't know above that yet. I just need to process this information. I'm not prepared to get into my priorities or what the numbers should be or anything like that. All I can tell you is that based on what you've shown us, I think going all the way, you know, back down to the revenue neutral rate just is a non-starter for me.
Okay. Jess and Alan.
Yeah, I think I'd be really interested in seeing kind of how we hit these goals in a phased manner. I agree. I don't think we're going to be at the revenue neutral rate, but I am having similarly a hard time understanding more than that right now. I would agree that it's certainly there are things that are must do's this year, but I don't think we're going to be able to do it all this year. We're going to have to balance all the things we want to do with, you know, like the mayor said, not pushing people out or not making the burden so huge. I also do think it's really important to understand what the county's going to do. That worries me a little. And I do think we certainly have things that we've put off. We also have things like climate action that we have made really strong statements on. So I'd like to see us at least start making progress there. I know we're not going to hit every single goal this year, but I'd like to see, you know, an investment and getting us off the ground. But I think all these things are important. So how can we phase these over a few years so that we know, and how are we showing, again, like our budget is really the most important statement of our values. So
Absolutely.
how do we show our values? And of course that, I mean, investing in town employees is like a no-brainer, especially for the last year. I mean, and we know that we're really missing some key staff areas, and that we need to not just retain people, that there are positions that we have to hire for. So I think we need to just be strategic and figure out that how the puzzle comes together over several years.
Thank you.
Alan?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that the revenue neutral, I mean, that doesn't serve any of the kind of long-term priorities that we've got, which will ultimately, you know, help our community. You know, beyond that, I'm not quite sure where I stand. So I sound a lot like Michael and Jess, but that's where I'm at.
Hi, Karen. Quick comments.
Not scenario one. Agree with what's been shared already.
Karen?
Same.
Yeah, I would share similar thoughts. I can understand not doing revenue neutral. I do have concerns, and I want us to be able to spend our American rescue plan monies wisely, and maybe they can help with some of the maintenance and infrastructure. We've got to do something on climate action. We can't do anything with what we've got allocated now. And I agree too. I want to invest in our town employees so they stay. And we didn't give them a raise last year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So 2% is that enough information for you at this point?
I think that's helpful for us to pull together a budget for you all to consider. And once again, with that, we'll have more discussions with council and the public before we get to the place where council feels comfortable with passing the budget. So whatever we produce, it's a living document for consideration and discussion, and ultimately a decision made by the council after hearing from the public. So we appreciate your involvement in this discussion tonight, and we have up on the screen the next steps in the process real quick. So we will be back before the council with the presentation of the manager's budget on May 5th. We have a budget work session scheduled right now for May 12th. A budget public hearing is scheduled for May 19th. Some of those dates may change a little bit. The mayor mentioned earlier that we may see some changes there. So we'll announce those changes well in advance. And right now we do have work sessions scheduled for the 26th of May and June 2nd if it's needed. And so we will end it there for this evening. And thank you, council, once again for.
Thank you. I'm sorry we have run over time, so we're not going to take any public comments this evening. You're always welcome to comment again other ways, and there'll be other opportunities to weigh in on the budget issues as well, and also for the LUMO. So we have that. Mr. Parker, can you read us into closed session, please?
Oh, of course. I move that the council go into closed session as authorized by General Statute 143-318.11A3 to consult with the town attorney regarding a judicial action and to preserve attorney-client privilege. At the conclusion of the closed session, the council will adopt a single motion to end the closed session and adjourn the meeting without taking further action.
Moved by Mr. Parker, second by Ms. Stegman. Need to do a roll call vote. Mr. Parker.
Aye.
Ms. Anderson.
Aye.
Mr. Boyncy.
Aye.
Ms. Goo.
Aye.
Mr. Nguyen.
Aye.
Ms. Ryan.
Aye.
Ms. Stegman.
Aye.
Mayor says aye as well. You have another link in your email to go to the closed session. I will be there. I have to be the last one to leave here. So we'll see you there. This work session is adjourned.